Darren, can you hear us?
We're trying to get Supervisor Spellman on the phone, but in the interim, if you could...
Darren, can you hear us?
Yeah.
Okay, now we can hear you too. Thank you.
Well, then speak up.
Okay. If you could please stand
You
up.
want to do the pledge? I hope you're standing up, Darren. Are you standing?
Okay. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
A little time delay.
We have Supervisor Spellman is on the phone. The protocol we're going to follow this morning is Lori Norton, the Chief Administrative Officer, will do opening comments. I don't know if she wants to go to staff. Bring it back to the board, see if they have any questions, ask staff in the audience if they have any questions or comments that they'd like to make, ask the public if they have any questions or comments, and bring it back to the board for the difficult part of the deliberations this morning. So, Lloyd?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is going to be a short opening comments. I have about 15 slides. I'm anticipating maybe 15 minutes. So our current general fund financial situation, and I will tell you that my comments this morning are all focused on the general fund, since that is the portion of the budget that the board has discretion over, and in hearing the comments from the departments as they presented last week, there are some departments that also have financial issues. Some of them indicated that they were spending down their fund balances, but they also advised the board that they were carefully managing that, and we're mindful of that, and I have every confidence that they are. So my comments this morning are going to be focused on the general fund, which is the most significant area of concern for me heading into these deliberations. So between 7-8 and 11-12, department expenditures have been reduced significantly. You heard that from a number of departments. We reduced our expenses from $41.8 million to $30.5 million. That's a 30% reduction, or $11.3 million. In fiscal year 12-13, the CAO recommended a budget of $34.5 million. At that time, revenues were $33.1 million. The board adopted a budget for 12-13 at $38.4 million, significantly above that was recommended. They added 21 positions. 14 of those were new, unfunded general fund positions at a cost of $1 million in that year. Those costs are now compounding as we go forward. We have COLAs that are now applied to that $1 million. We have increased PERS costs associated with those new positions. The additional expenses that the board approved was to contribute more to reserves. In fiscal year 13-14, the recommended budget is $36.9, and we are spending those contributions that the board made last year to reserves. So we are in a position where our expenses are increasing. We're spending down our savings account, our reserves, to pay for those increased expenses, and our revenues are not growing at a rate to keep up with that. As you heard, there's significant pent-up demands and real needs. I am so impressed with all the departments and applaud them. They came to your board. They outlined real needs. I did not hear anyone asking for something that they wanted that was in excess of a need. We have real needs. And we don't have the resources to pay for those needs. The current and future general fund expenses exceed our revenues. They're insufficient to even support our current cost, let alone any additional cost. We're not adequately adding to our reserves. We are spending down our reserves, and that leaves us in a place that is very vulnerable and is not sustainable. I just want to make sure that it is clearly understood that the status quo budget, the budget that is before you, the recommended budget, adds general fund dollars. It increases the general fund contributions to public safety. It increases the general fund contributions to general government. Development services decreases. Health and Human Services, which is a maintenance of effort, remains constant. But the budget before you actually increases resources going to both general government and public safety. You heard some requests for some equipment presented last week, so I wanted to make sure that you are aware that in the recommended budget is $44,000 coming from their designated funds, so it's not being proposed to be funded by general fund, for the sheriff's life scan. There's $5,000 from the asset forfeiture fund for the DA's copier. County Council's limited term position that they're asking for is funded. Human Services Agency is funding that upgrade to that position. In the assessor's office, again, coming from their designated funds, not the general fund, but their filing system, their workstation, and their 3 vehicles are funded. Now, the assessor has expressed to us that those amounts that are budgeted may not be sufficient. They've budgeted those amounts in previous years. Costs are increasing, so they may have to reduce what they actually purchased. But again, these are included in the recommended budget that's before you. So I want to revisit this slide, and I added some numbers to it so that we could talk about it. And I'm sorry to go through this in painful detail, but I think it's really critical. So if you look back, you can see my pointer. This is the year that we were up. Our expenses were at $41 million. Our revenues at that point in time were at $38 million, $39 million. So this is where we hit our high. This red line, which is expenses, have been decreasing ever since. So this is the real decrease that the departments have experienced over the last several years. Our revenue line has also been decreasing, as you can see, dramatically. So now if we look at the fiscal year 11-12 budget, we reached our historic low. This is general fund. Our budget was $30.5 million. Last year, the CAO recommended this yellow dot, $34.5 million. We had a significant cash carry that year, $5 million. That significant cash carry was the result of primarily a number of insurance premiums that had been reduced substantially because our staffing had gone down so substantially that we had reduced costs. That was an anomaly. We are not going to see that level of cash carry again. And it's not just reserves. We had contingency funds that the board had budgeted that we did not spend that year. We had
we just had a lot of unspent expenditures. I mean, when departments put their budgets together, at the beginning, they thought we would spend $10,000 on office supplies, and we ended up spending so that $2,000. So if you add up those $2,000 here and $5,000 there, $5,000 there, it all adds up. And so that is really what that fund active cash carry becomes. It's that unspent budget.
And in addition to that, usually at year-end, we're experiencing encumbrances that range $500,000 to $750,000. With some changes implemented by the controller last year, our encumbered funds were significantly lower at year-end than what we expected. They were only like $167,000 as opposed to $500,000 to $750,000.
Thank you, guys.
And the one other thing to also note is that the administration and the board of supervisors knew that we needed to be fiscally conservative, so there was really a pleading with department heads to be as fiscally conservative as they possibly could with the budgets that they had, and they did. And they really did. They deferred expenditures, whether it was the right thing to do or not, because now things are catching up with them, but they did defer every way they possibly could, and those deferrals equated to a larger cash carry.
Thank you guys again. I had a little brain mishap there, so I appreciate you stepping in. I think it is important to note that the other part of this, the other anomaly that I don't think is going to happen again is exactly as Ms. Callens pointed out. Departments were being extremely frugal, knowing that we were in a very difficult time. So they were holding positions vacant. They were saving resources as much as they possibly could to help with that situation. As our financial situation becomes more difficult, it is more difficult for them to not spend their entire budget. So again, I just cannot stress enough that I do not believe that $5 million is going to happen again. I wish it would, very honestly, but I don't believe it is. So this is what the CAO recommended. The board adopted a budget of $38.4 million. Much of that $38.4 million is added ongoing expenses, and that's I'll get to that in just a minute. So our recommended budget this year is $36.9 million. The primary difference, this reduction, is again because we're not contributing to reserves. What would show up, it would show up in this line that we were putting money away into reserves. We're not contributing to reserves. This difference right here between our revenue line and our expense line, we're going to fund using cash carry or fund balance. So that's the 3.26 that we are anticipating in fund balance. And I need to make a correction here. In our slide presentation, our opening slide presentation, I had 3.6. It's actually 3.26 or 3.3 that we are projecting as a cash carry. So that's what's going to close this gap, which is going to take this revenue line up to meet this expense line for this 1 year only. Going forward, you can see our expenses are going to continue to increase. This is just the normal, 3.5%, 4%, 5% that's our increased salary costs based on merit increases, longevity pay, built-in negotiated increases, our increased obligation, our estimated increased obligation to PERS, because I don't think we have the final numbers yet on that. This does not include things like our property tax system, if we need to add temporary staffing to help implement that, and that becomes an obligation of the general fund. This does not include the $250,000 that we know is a projected cost to maintain the jail. This does not include any new staffing that you might add today to respond to those real needs that we can't afford for additional staffing. I want to point out the difference here between the revenue and the expense lines. When we were back in this area where our expenses were at their high, look at where our revenues were. We are not going to get back to that point again anywhere near in the near future. So again, our revenues, the historic lows, our expenses creeping back up to where they were when we were at a high. Can't afford that. Going forward, the revenue projections, the green revenue projection again is based on the assumption that we are going to start seeing an increase flat this year, we hope. I don't know if the assessor has any new information on that. We're hoping flat this year, and then starting to see some increases in our BLF and our assessed valuation. The blue line again, we said, if under some circumstance we were to double those revenues, what would it look like? That's the line you get with it. Still a significant gap. I want to talk to the board during the course of time between now and the final budget about some targeted fee increases. That would also help close this gap. But we are not going to be making up $6 to $8 million in fee increases, in revenue that we're not anticipating. So going forward, again, looking at what's going to happen in the next several years, we have a significant gap between our projected expenses and our projected revenues. We can't effectuate our revenues to take care of that, which means we are going to be looking at significant reductions in cost. In the general fund, 67% of the general fund budget is salaries and benefits. We can't cut enough office supplies to make up that deficit. We are going to be making some serious choices about reductions in salaries and benefits. Now that I've beaten that horse, I will move on. So again, general fund risks, reserves and one-time funding. We are using them to fund ongoing costs, not sustainable. We still aren't sure about the adult detention facility, both the construction and operating costs. Construction clearly not supposed to be a general fund obligation, hopeful that it won't be, and just aren't clear about that. We have some new numbers from the Sheriff's Department today. I want to thank them. I think they did their best to come up with the absolute minimum that they believe it's going to take to open the new detention facility and staff it appropriately. I'll let them speak to that issue. Again, I think they've done their best to pare the numbers back, and we can't afford it. We can't even afford to add what they're going to ask you to add today. General plan update. Two issues there. We're not sure we have sufficient resources in the budget to fully fund it. We hope we have for the current year. And of course, the issue that County Council has brought before you, general plans are challenged. And so there would be an obligation for the board, hopefully not this year, but sometime into the future when our expense line is continuing up. Other anticipated litigation or liability. Emergencies or disasters, and I want to just speak to this for just a minute because there's been some questions. What are contingencies for? What are reserves for? It's not that they're significantly different. They're both savings account. Contingencies are generally a line item that we budget for every year, anticipating that in the current budget we may not achieve all the revenues that we anticipated. We may have expenses that exceed what we anticipated. Contingencies are the first place we would go to talk to the board about moving some resources from contingencies to fund something that was either not budgeted for appropriately or unanticipated. Something may come up during the course of the year that the board wants to take advantage of. That's the first place we would go. Reserves are just the second level of our savings account. That is the place that we go. If we have a fire or a natural disaster, we may ultimately get reimbursed for the cost of responding to that, but for the first several weeks or for some period of time, we're going to have to come up with the resources to pay for any added costs. And we need to have some reserves in order to be able to do that. Outside influences beyond our control. Hope we're not going to go there, but there is the potential that we could see some further weakening of the economy as a result of the federal budget. Looks like the state budget is good for 1 year, but already, if you've been reading the news the last couple of weeks, it really is a patch. They have significant obligations that they too have not funded in this current state budget that are going to be coming due. STRS is just an example. Their pension obligation for their teachers, severely underfunded. So I've heard the governor refer to it as the wall of debt that has not gone away. We're in a better place this year. We'll see what it looks like next year. Little discussion about TEETR. TEETR is a source of reserve fund. It's general fund discretionary dollars. It is a fund that has been built up since we implemented the TEETR program, and that was in the 90s? Late 90s. So we have had a fund balance building. The bottom line here, this gold bar is what we get in TEETR every year, an average. We've been getting between $6 and $1 million, so we averaged it. This represents $750,000 that we contribute to our TEETR fund every year. The green lines represent our planned expenses at this point in time. And again, going back last year, we used about $880,000 in TEETR funds. This year, in this current budget, we are proposing to use $3.41 billion in TEETR funds. A significant amount of that is for licensing, software obligations that are sort of the regular use of teeter, and what the board has determined they want to use the teeter fund for implementing new technologies. The remainder of this is a combination. It is about $1.8 million, which is really plugging a general fund deficit. $1.3 million of that is A87 backfill. Actually, $1 million of it is A87 backfill, and about $780,000 is just a deficit in the general fund that we were given instructions to paper over. There is no way to paper over a deficit in the general fund. You have to fund it. The board is required by statute to adopt the balanced budget.
So that's really close to the revenue we're bringing in. The 785 is close to the revenue we're bringing in.
That is true, but that 750 that we're bringing in over every year is actually already consumed by our ongoing obligations to technology, licensing, and technology. The added cost.
That's in addition
After
to.
that, yeah. So what happened is when we started seeing the revenues go down, okay, and our expenditures were continuing to go up, there were things that we could cut in technology services, and there were things we couldn't.
Right.
So he couldn't stop paying for the property tax system, otherwise we wouldn't have a property tax system. He couldn't stop paying for our financial system, otherwise we wouldn't
Right.
have one.
I understand.
And then also he is paying for the licensing, which is the email, the Word, the Excel, and all of that.
Yeah, those contracts we've entered
Those
into.
contracts are obligated to, and so we've been consuming that revenue almost 100%.
Into the, okay.
And in addition to that is the $250,000 that was agreed upon to replace the penalty interest that was running prior to implementation of teeter, as well as this year and next year and the year after, the repayment of the two audits.
3 years, right?
Right. And those costs are all represented in these future projections. In addition, there's $3.3 million included in these future projections for the new property tax system. The remainder of that cost is actually look to two places. One may come out of other funding sources, about $500,000, and there could be some general fund obligations for fixed-term positions, et cetera, to implement that software. So I think the most important point that was made is that our ongoing revenue, $750, is totally consumed by our ongoing obligation for technology and software. And it's not just that we have contracts. Those are essential tools that this county cannot function without. So those at the end of those contracts, we're not going to not
But we
continue.
still haven't agreed to actually the $3.3 million in this budget, right? There's no that software isn't in this budget.
That software is not in this budget. The only assumption
We're
here,
assuming it in these though.
that is correct.
Why don't we go ahead and stick it in the budget? So we, since we keep talking about it, why don't we actually put it in the budget or not put it in the budget?
My simple answer is we don't have the resources. We can. We've phased it in over 4 years. The parts of those costs are represented in these 4 years.
Uh-huh.
And
Well, I don't like the game of yes, it's going to be projected, but we're not putting it in this fiscal year's budget at all.
so we don't know what the actual cost is going to be. We will be putting it in the budget if indeed the board decides to proceed with that and we reach agreement and we enter into a contract. That is when it becomes real. Until then, it's a potential. I hate to say this, but based on the financial situation, I'm going to wait for the daggers. We may have to implement that more slowly. We may have to have modules that are introduced and phased in over time. We may not be able to afford, even though it's a system that's critical. It's a backbone of this operation. It is a critical system, but we may have to phase it in more slowly.
Push it off next fiscal year or something like that.
It will be up to the board to decide, and that may be something.
But that's
that
an
we have to
unknown
consider.
because we don't know the current situation with with the carrier that we have now.
Yeah,
We don't know how long they're, so,
Yeah. And that's I mean, I
I think
think
it's like, some of these, like when some of these folks came with a presentation for us about their software upgrades, and it wasn't like we had our back against the wall and they had a knife to our throat. They came with real numbers on savings and ways that it would improve our situation. We know that this is going to improve our situation, but I get the feeling like we don't have a choice.
So I think I don't want to take us off course. What I will say is that we're in a very challenging place. Number one, no doubt, we need to make a move at some point in time. Most counties are making a move because the current provider isn't providing the level of service that is desirous. So many counties are looking at making a move. We may have to delay implementation or phase in implementation to allow us to afford the system.
Good. Thank you.
So this, again, previous slide graphically, now I'm showing you what makes up the $2.8 million in additional costs, not additional costs, in the costs coming from the teeter in the current year. This is what is in the current budget. We did include the library computers, $20,000. As previously noted, some of the audit payments are included, and those are 3 years. So after 3 years, those will taper off. The general fund contribution, which has been an ongoing contribution as per board policy. Ongoing network licenses, and you can see there the 1.8 that is really filling a deficit in the general fund. We did not include this in the recommended budget, and my recommendation to the board is that we delay the addition of county technology upgrades until the final budget. I think both of these systems are critical. I heard the presentations last week. I saw broad support for particularly the HR software update. I think it will benefit the county, and as we look at reductions in, again, where I think we're going to have to reduce, which is salaries and benefits, because that's 67% of the general fund budget, technology improvements can help us to do that. And yet I cannot recommend, when we have such a significant deficit, that we fund anything else out of this recommended budget. So again, the second note is just to tell you that the property tax system is partially included in that teeter. We included $3.3 million over 3 to 4 years.
Starting next year, not this year.
Starting this year.
Well,
yes.
That goes back to what Chris said. Why not start it in 13-14? I thought I heard you say.
I apologize. It is in 13-14. When you said this year, I meant in the recommended budget.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
It's projected, but it's not in the budget.
Correct. So, my concern that I believe you're probably hearing loud and clear is that teeter is a source of revenue. It is beyond the 7.5, which we're getting every year and is committed every year. It has served as a reserve. We are depleting that reserve. And adding additional ongoing commitments to that is unsustainable. Just to reiterate, the reserve funding levels, they're necessary for cash flow, for the county to be able to meet our cash flow needs. They help with credit rating agencies if we're seeking to borrow funds. There are we could find 2 established standards, and these are the 2 standards. The credit agencies suggest that you keep the cash equivalent of 10 to 15% of the operating budget. That would mean 3.7 to 5.5. GFOA, which is the Government Finance Officers Association, recommends the equivalent of 2 months of operating revenues. For us, that's about $6 million. Our current reserve levels are far less than those recommendations. had a question yesterday, what does that mean? What does it cost us? You know, I can't tell you that. It is a hypothetical. If we were to seek to borrow, we would be paying more in interest because we don't have sufficient reserves.
Now, if you include Teeter there, we're fine with that recommendation.
I would say that prior to this recommended budget, we would be fine. But again, we're planning to spend down a significant portion of our Teeter reserve in the recommended
You're
budget.
still over $3 million, right?
Well, but you have to also consider the cash flow. So the issue is, and if you recall, for Teeter, so that means that we pay the money out before we ever receive it.
Right.
So we've got a tax fund that is significantly deficit.
So you can't count the Teeter toward the reserves because you need that for the cash flow.
You can count what I do when I'm looking at cash is I look at the tax fund that's negative, and then I look at the Teeter fund and I kind of cross them.
Right.
And then anything that's in excess of that, then I consider that. But that's a changing number.
Mm-hmm.
So I look at it from a cash flow perspective, and outside agencies will also look at it from, but only, it's kind of a portion of it. So we just have to be careful. But I can tell you, when I'm looking at when I'm looking at all of the needs that departments want, like adding everything up, and then considering how much we're looking at spending out of Teeter, the reality is we've not had to borrow money for operations, for cash flow, for since I took office. And it's likely that if we don't kind of plug this up and stop it for a minute so we can kind of reevaluate what we need to do, we will have to start borrowing. Because the reality is we just will not have the cash here for operations. It'll be a timing issue at that point. I mean, we'll have the cash at some point, but only temporarily. And that's the thing that we're going to have an added headache in operations.
So, Rebecca, you're talking about a trans to temporarily get us through, because, again, the way Teeter works is when we collect the property tax, we pay it out as if every single individual paid all of their property tax. So we're paying out to the schools and other districts in advance of us actually receiving the money. We then, the benefit for us is that when they actually do pay and when there's penalties accrued, we get the benefit of those penalties. So that's how the Teeter fund has accumulated. If we don't have sufficient resources for cash flow, we would have to do a trans, which is a short-term temporary borrowing to be able to pay that out. Would that impact our interest rate on the trans if we don't have sufficient resources? So at that point in time, it would cease to be a hypothetical and would become a real cost to the county to do that short-term borrowing.
Yes.
And like most counties, we're incurring a lot of expenses the first half of the year, but we don't get our major revenues, property tax, until December. So it's the trans to cover the cash flow, and it has to be repaid by the end of that fiscal year. So
Or do internal borrowing. If we do that, we still have to pay interest on that internal borrowing.
Yes, and the other thing that should be noted with Teeter is that this was a pitch that we made to special districts if they wanted to also be part of the Teeter plan, was that they, if they had cash flow issues because of that timing, because their expenditures are mostly happening from July through November, they can borrow from the county. And they have. And just like we heard over the course of these last several days, departments stating that they're eating into their fund balance. These special districts have been doing the same thing. So they have been borrowing from us. But if we, as the main entity, don't have the cash flow for our own operations, we'll be unable to loan monies for operations for the special districts. It's all dependent on us having that cash. So if we do not have the cash, they will not be able to borrow.
So I'm going to leave this slide, but I just want to say, when I think about our current reserve funding, we have 2.4 in reserves. We have $850,000 in contingencies if the board decides to fund those in this recommended budget. And we have approximately, what did we put away for the 27th pay period?
We put 125,000 a year. We have for that about, I think at this point, 625,000.
Okay. So when I think about our reserves, those are our reserves. And we know that 27th pay period is going to come, so we're going to owe that. And so again, what causes me the concern is going back to this chart here, that shows next year, and this doesn't include the property tax system. Next year, we're looking at a $6 million deficit. And if we have let's say we have a $2.5 million cash carry, which that would be great, the rest of this is going to have to come from somewhere. And the only sources that we have are teeter and those reserves that I just outlined. So we could easily deplete our reserves over the next 2 years if we do not appropriately budget.
And that's assuming that the county's going to stay flat on revenue.
No, that's assuming an increase in revenue. That's assuming increases in our two primary sources, which are AB and VLF. Would you like to speak to that, Leslie?
Sure. When we built,
Let me go back
to your favorite slide. When we built those revenue projections, assuming increases in the assessment goal beginning next year. This year, my current projection is that we're flat. I can tell you right now we're negative. The totals I last ran, we are in the negative. I think that when we finish our process, which is starting tomorrow morning, we will end up with a flat assessment roll, and if I'm off by 1%, that's really not a big deal in the overall scheme of things. I'm projecting that given where we are with our decline in value properties, over 20,000 properties are in decline in value status, and I'm projecting that what we're seeing on limited new construction and limited transfers, that green line that's going up is that revenue increase. The blue dotted line that is added to that doubles those projections, assumes that our assessment roll will increase better than we're currently seeing. And it's really important for the board to understand one really key fact. In fact, I think it was the California Taxpayers Association, CalTax perhaps, Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, recently released a report about property taxes as they fund government. Prop 13 just had its 35th anniversary. So there's 35 years now of seeing the impact of that change in the Constitution on funding sources. And what they found is that property taxes are extremely stable. Even with those increases and decreases that we've seen recently, it's still a very stable funding source. So when you hear, and I know that in the newspaper you hear, property values are going up double digit, and that doesn't necessarily translate to double-digit increases on the assessment goal. So these projections here are building in what we think we're going to see.
Those projections, that green line also includes a consumer revenue increase and a franchise fee increase. So those aren't staying the same. The consumer revenues, we estimate the same as the increases in property tax. So that green line in fiscal year 14-15 is 1% and 2% for the following years. And the franchise fees are estimated at a 1% increase throughout this time period. So we have added revenue increases to that projection.
And if the board is willing to entertain fee increases, that could help with that green line, but again, it's not going to close the significant gap that we have. So moving on, in conclusion, the budget is balanced, but it's balanced using $2.8 million of one-time teeter funds and a projected $3.2 million in fund balance cash carry. Practice of using one-time sources for ongoing uses is contrary to board principles and is not sustainable. Contingencies are budgeted at $850, which is equal to 2.3% of the general fund appropriation. It's less than the board's goals of funding contingencies at 3 to 4%. As we just discussed, revenues are forecast to grow marginally. The revenue growth is not sufficient to offset cost increases, and those are our existing costs. Fee increases are not going to be sufficient to fund future costs. The general fund, as I've mentioned previously, 67% of the general fund budget is salaries and benefits. We cannot cut enough in services and supplies to make up this deficit. So we are looking at decreasing the general fund going forward. And just to put it in perspective, to close the gap that we're looking at this year, about $2 million, we would have to take a 10%. You heard departments concerned about the 5%. We would have to take a 10% reduction. If you wanted to hold the sheriff harmless and not cut even broader public safety harmless, because I don't want to divide any groups, but if you wanted to hold them harmless, it would take a 20 to 25% reduction in every other county general fund department to be able to do that. That to me is not a scenario that we could think about. What I would like to encourage the board is to maintain our reserves so that we can have a soft landing and move down over time as we cut costs. I would rather not add costs, and in fact, I would, again, really like to put a soft freeze on hiring new positions in the general fund and really looking at and evaluating every position before we fill it to determine whether we're going to have the ongoing resources to pay for it. To make up this difference in the general fund, I think everything is going to have to be on the table. We may be looking at consolidations. We're just going to have everything on the table to be able to deal with this level of deficit. So I'm going to recommend that you adopt the budget as presented, defer any added costs until final budget hearings. And I'm just going to say here, I can't imagine what is going to change between now and final budget hearings that's going to significantly change our financial position. I'm going to be talking to departments about fee increases and looking at what we might be able to generate through fees if the board is willing to consider that. But the deficit is so great that we're, adding anything even at final budget I think is going to be very challenging. I'm hoping that you'll direct me to work with the department heads to look at any potential revenue enhancements and cost savings, and to work with the auditor controller again to identify any designated funds that we can use to add some of the one-time purchases into the current budget. These were some of the follow-ups that I noted during last week's. There's an interest from the board in having some additional information on the adult detention facility, costs associated with 65 and 80 beds. And again, sheriff's representatives are here. They have some information if you'd like that to be presented. You asked us to review A87 cost allocations and develop a recommendation. I'd like to put together a working group with the auditor, controller, department heads, impacted department heads, and start working on that right away. Public Works wanted a list of planned road projects by district to each of the supervisors. I believe those lists are being put together. I don't see Tom in the room, but we'll make sure that they are.
Right now.
Okay. And building and code enforcement. There was a request for some additional information both on activities that the department engages in and, again, a request that if certain activities are going on within your districts that you be notified. So added that to the list as a follow-up. With that, I'm going to close. I would just like to say that as your new CAO, in my fourth week in sitting in this chair, this is not the presentation I hope to be making to you, but I think it's the financially responsible thing to do.
I have that's been an idea that's floated around a lot out there over the years. It seems like it might be good to do a workshop on that and see what that would look like and if there'd be savings, cost savings over the long run. I don't know if you guys are interested in that.
I think anything's on the table.
My experience in other counties is really the only time that you achieve any savings with that is that when there's retirements at high-level positions.
Yeah, kind of like through attrition.
Right.
Yeah.
But there's also some benefits if you bring a larger group of people together. There's the opportunity to have a little more depth in a number of organizations, and so there are some other benefits that could accrue as a result of that. Again, that's the end of my presentation. Thank you for allowing me the
One of
time.
the things that we were impressed with in the interview with you is that you had a lot of county budget experience. Maybe we wish it was something else, Lori. Thank you. It wasn't. Thank you. Does the board have any questions of the CAO?
I just have a general comment. First, Lori, for just being here for 4 weeks and stepping into this, thank you. Very difficult challenge as a newbie coming on board and getting up to speed on all of this. And, I think your experience will be very helpful as we move forward. And then I'd also like to say last week, personally, I really enjoyed myself. People thought I was a little crazy for that, but I appreciated each and every department that came forward and presented your budgets, pro and con, and discussed very in such a way where it helped me to better understand your operations and what's necessary to carry on the day-to-day work. And I, too, like Lori echoed, I didn't find anybody asking for anything exorbitant. We're in very difficult times across the board, whether you're in government or the private sector. And I found everything that was being asked of was very reasonable. It's just finding our creative ways to help finance and carry forward. So I know it took some folks a lot of time to put together these presentations and information, and I, for one, really appreciated it.
Thank you. I did too. Does the board have any questions of Lori at the moment? All right. Do any staff members have any comments or questions they'd like to propose to the CAO? Does any member of the public have any questions or comments?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Gary Caldwell, Valley Springs. I heard the CEO say that one of the reasons for the fund balance carryover is the frugality of the department heads. And I heard the county auditor say that, it doesn't take long. You reduce your expenses a couple thousand here and a couple thousand there, and pretty soon it adds up, and I understand that. And I see in one of the charts on page 4 of the handout, one of the slides, it says that she's proposing to use $3.2 million in fund balance to balance the budget as part of the effort to balance the budget. The other day, a week ago today, as a matter of fact, there was a table, and it was on page 8, and I commented about this. It said all funds, budget comparison, and for 12-13, it shows a fund balance of almost $18 million. A fund balance for 12-13. And in fact, I wrote here, wow. And I'm assuming in that $17.6 million is, I assume, this $3 million of general fund money. And my question is, if you look at 13-14 on this all funds budget comparison, it talks about under revenues, the very last one, it says under revenue, other revenues, $22.5 million. Is that $17.6 million carryover in the 22.5? Where is the fund balance shown in the list of revenues?
Gary, are you talking about the slides from last week?
Yeah.
Yes.
Page 8. I guess what I'm asking is that fund balance in the general fund reflected in the revenues shown for all funds for 13-14? It is?
The general fund is one of the multiple funds that the county has. We are projecting a fund balance at the end of this fiscal year, which has not closed yet, so it's still a projection of 3.26 in the general fund.
So also then the $17 million fund balance here is in the $22 million of revenue shown here under other funds.
Gary, is this the one?
No, it's the chart
it's a
from last week,
it's
the
a
all
chart,
funds
right?
chart. So that's the picture of
Page
it.
8.
This is the, thank
there it is.
you, Zachariah. This is the chart that he's referring
Thanks,
to.
Zachariah.
So you are looking at 13-14 recommended,
Well, I'm looking at the fund balance 17.6 and 1213. And see, you show in the next column over to the right, revenues for 1314. Well, you have a fund balance shown there for all funds of 17 plus million. Where is that reflected in revenues for 1314?
So in the general fund where we are budgeting for 1314,
As you are here.
$3.26 million or $3.3 million. Some of the other departments may not be budgeting. That may be money, for instance, solid waste may have a major project that they're planning on at some point in time in the future. They retain funding in their fund balance so that when they want to pursue that project, they have a fund balance to pay for that capital improvement. So across the board and across the many funds that we have within the county, departments retain a fund balance to fund future expenses.
Well,
it has not been shown as a revenue until the planned expenditure.
Gary, if I can see what you're saying, where is the difference between the 17.6 and the 9.2?
The difference? No.
Well, you're talking about fund balance at 17.6, and then is that included in the revenue in the following year? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Well, where's it shown?
That fund balance may be spent down because if you notice that the revenues for that year are only 119.6 million versus expected expenditures of 137. So part of that is spent down because maybe not all revenues come in or not all the expenditures come in. So what we are estimating the fund balance based on what happens in 1213 is instead of the 17.6, we're looking at 9.2 with current year revenues of 99.2 and current year expenditures of 100.
Maybe I'm not asking this clearly enough, Madam Chair. Where is the 17 million shown in the revenues for 13? Where is it? Well, I think you're suggesting, however, that the 3.2 million be reflected in revenues, the fund balance, be reflected in revenues in order to offset the proposed expenditures.
Let Rebecca tell you.
So if you take a fund balance of cash carry, it's like if you were balancing your checkbooks, okay? And you had your income and you had your expenditures and you had $10 left over, okay? So you have $10 left over, you carry it over to the following month as your beginning balance. So it's not a revenue because we counted that as revenue last year. Okay? So we already attributed that $10 of income last year. And so all it's going to do is it's going to be kind of like a savings. It's a carryover from the year before between your income for a year and your expenditure. So the $17.6 million is across all funds. It was a carryover balance. That was the difference between our current year revenues and our current year expenditures.
Okay.
So if we have revenues of $1 million and we have expenditures of $2 million, that would be, if we had no money sitting on the table, that would be a deficit of $1 million, right? But the fact that we have carryover of $1 million from the year before, that kind of goes into mitigate that loss of revenue or that deficit.
I guess what I heard last week was that the fund balances, wherever they occur throughout the various departments, are not necessarily going to be assigned to those departments. Is that correct?
No, that's not
It
correct.
goes into the big pot.
No, that's not correct. Funds are segregated accounts. You can't cross funds, with the exception the general fund could be used if we had the resources to fund other funds, but we can't bring money in from the solid waste fund, from the airport fund, from the roads fund to pay general fund expenses.
I'm not suggesting you do cross funds. Let's say the assessor has $1 million a fund balance at the end of the fiscal year.
She did.
General fund money.
She did.
Does she start out with $1 million? That's what I'm saying.
The general fund
it goes into the big pot.
The general fund itself, yes.
Okay.
The expenses that are not incurred in departments roll into the general fund balance. The board then has the authority and responsibility to reallocate that money in a future year.
And I'd like to reiterate what I said last week with respect to general fund, since you mentioned general fund, that the VLF money that goes to Public Works is general fund money. I'd like to see that removed from the road fund, commingling with the road funds to support Public Works, and put it into public safety, the board's number one priority. And also, I am recommending, and I talked with Mr. Moss about this, that you cancel the $66,000 contract with the county assassin and put that back into the general fund to be usable by the board for other general fund activities. And I'd like to alter what I said or amend what I said last week. Not necessarily go to public safety, but I didn't realize at the time that the animal services was going to have a huge deficit there, and I'd like to see it go to animal services then. That's within the same agency.
So just through the chair, one point I'd like to make, what the speaker is referring to is the $350,000 that is in the budget for the roads fund. That is a one-time source. This is the second year, in my understanding, that the board has chosen to allocate $350,000 to roads. You certainly can reallocate those funds. If you allocate them to public safety or anyone else as salary and benefits, it becomes an ongoing annual cost that, again, is going to increase over time as COLAs, negotiated increases, pension costs increase. But it's clearly the board's ability to do that.
And I like your comment about the practice of using one-time sources for ongoing uses is contrary to the board's principles. I think that's contrary to everyone's principles, that you fund ongoing costs with one-time allocations. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary.
Any members, anyone else in the public like to comment?
My name is Peter Race, Generalin. It's very refreshing now. I'm glad to hear somebody who's not in La La Land anymore, okay? Reality hurts, and I'm looking at those faces. We needed more. But I'm not going to go into each department and so on. That's your headache. But I would request that continue the reality, because we depended so much what's going on in the state. And let these elected officials decide which is correct, which is not, what is a balanced budget for the state, and what's the auditor controller of the state stating how much money the state has. It would be a good idea of what's coming down the road. I'm sure the attorney can give these folks reality check what's coming down the tube. And I'm not talking about the tunnel, but I'm talking about like how much energy is going to go up, since they're going to cut down 10% of the energy production in California. Down south, how much PG&E going to go up for all of us? So how it's going to affect the sales tax that you might be or might not be getting in? That will affect every one of us. And so reality sometimes is not nice, and I know you, looking at your face, you don't like to hear what she said, and I realize you think I'm picking on you, because sometimes I say, hey, it doesn't look too bright. It's not going to look too bright. That curve that you folks put up there, good 10 years, 5 to 10 years at least, because those houses that are going to be sold, that's foreclosed on, the price they're going to be sold for is going to be substantially less that you're getting tax on. I hope you realize it. Those foreclosed homes, that the property tax does make a big money for you. Those, the bank will currently paying you the same property tax, but once it's going to change hands, reality is going to hit. And hopefully make the right decision. What is important to your constituents? What's reality is? All the good intentions and your generous intentions is always going to be on someone else's pocketbook. And it might sound good, might sound caring, but sometimes reality, just like you would do it at home. You just got to do it. Reality. We ain't paying a price for past couple of years ideology and policies. We're going to be paying the prices. And don't forget, you're stuck with it. And I might be here harping on you, but it's a big bunch of people who are going to say, hey, I can make a change. It's just easier to walk away. Somebody's still holding the bag for all the applications. So I don't envy you. I'm not going to give you any sympathy. You want it, you got it. And we are going to be very close how you spend your money and what for. Thank you.
It's our money now.
Is there any other public comment?
Joe Kelly, thank you. You did a wonderful job. Glad you're here. Ms. Davis, Ms. Cowan, the rest of your working group, thank you. You've done good jobs. Now I've got a big concern. I'm probably, other than Ms. Calloway and Ms. Elliott, I'm probably the only one left around here other than those that are involved in the county government part of it that have any idea about that jail. I'm a little ticked right now because now I'm seeing, oh, well, it's even going to be tough to get 65 to 80 bed jail out of a 160 bed jail that we're paying for with an increasing value of payment every year due to the decline in property values. I would say we were promised by a unanimous vote in July of 2007 by that board, which only one member still exists on the current board, Chair Calloway. We were promised a 160-bed jail. They did more expenditures on consultants at the front of how to get to the value per $100,000 that we're paying to be able to provide this new facility that now looks like it's not going to be open to full capacity. They also signed a contract with the state. Now I know the state can go back and make the changes. Nobody's come forward and asked the people if we want to make the change or if we want to hold your feet to the fire and make it a 160-bed jail. But the state's going to work it out for you. They already have. Last Friday, they passed in the state assembly. They're going to okay this concept of parcel tax or reduced percentage, undermining Prop 13. I believe today the state Senate is voting on the same thing. So we could be today being in a world of hurt, we the people, the taxpayers, because then every government will be coming in to raise taxes through whatever means they can.
Is that a 55%? Is that what they're...
It's going to go, it might even go to 50.1. I don't know. I just keep getting these information things coming through to me. So it's bothersome to me when I see something we were promised, we were told we were supposed to be excited for. Yet I have yet to run into anybody that voted for it. So I'm concerned in that respect, and I took time to go through one of these binders. I think it was the CAO's recommendation binder. Went through it. I read through it. But I stopped at almost every department and looked at certain things in the cost stuff, salaries and CalPERS. And I was surprised at the percentages of increases over the last 3 years. And now it looks like it's going to level out into the fourth year from the third year. I also spent a lot of time reading the sheriff's budget request of all the departments, but in particular on the jail. So that's my biggest concern, is I feel that years ago, by the cabal that ran this county then and up until last year, we've been taken advantage of. and the cabal being the former Board of Supervisors. I also see something near and dear to my heart, which I have not received a response to, is the Building and Code Enforcement provide information on department activities. Yeah, let's get this thing rolling forward so we know who's who. I'm still waiting to find out if what you folks passed last Tuesday, sending to the judge, was true and correct or incorrect. The other thing I have is on this construction of the jail, as the CAO made a statement in that, not clear if the jail cost will be general funds. So now we're getting down that close to a possibility that with more change orders possibly in the last, two months, what is supposed to be in August, that thing's supposed to be final, that we're going to be looking that maybe it might have to come out to pay out of general funds, or is this something else that might be coming to be caused out of the general fund on the construction side, or is the construction side not a concern, just the operating costs? Just the operating costs, okay. Well, once again, it probably would have been very instructive to the people of Calaveras County. And I railed about it back then. I railed about it up until today about this thing. Maybe then, any time you folks present something to the people for a vote, maybe you should provide real transparency as to what happens from the good times to the bad, mediocre times to the bad times, what can happen, so that people can really have a reality check. Yes, we've never really gone through anything this bad. I don't think, at least in my lifetime, there's been severe problems, but I don't think anything as severe as what we're going through today. And one other thing, I would like to thank Dana Nichols for his article in the Stockton Record, because I was looking for information this last week to see what was done and said about the jail. And he's the only one that printed something about it. And I applaud him for doing that, and I certainly do appreciate it. One other thing, to Captain Macedo, I applaud his and whoever his group, if he had others helping him put together his presentation to you folks and in the writings and everything, that I thought it was well done, and it puts to a point. You have an obligation. I'm backing that concept of you have an obligation. It was promised to us by our vote of approval for that jail. Reneging on it now could cause major ramifications in the near future to the long-term future of the balance of 4 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly.
Hello, Tanya Dawson from Valley Springs. I have a couple questions. On slide 6, it's the last slide on page 2 of the handout. You said 3.3 million was cash carry. What does cash carry mean?
So that is unspent, it's unspent dollars. So when the budget was passed, all the general fund departments believed that they were going to have full revenue of $10 million. And then we believed that they were going to have full expenditures of it's about in reality. So it's the difference between actually received revenues and the actual spent expenditures. So what we did is we went through every general fund budget and we looked at what the revenue was that they had received and what we projected them to receive to the end of the year. We also looked at all of their expenditures and what we projected they were actually going to spend at the end of the year. Things happen. And so we did a conservative estimate between the revenues and expenditures that we projected and where we think we're going to be at the end of the year. But things happen, so that's why it's just a projection. Things do happen, things happen in the sheriff's department that cause them to have to spend overtime. Other expenditures might come in at the last minute that the department didn't expect. So in addition, you can also find that a grant revenue that was projected to not be received until 2014 on a claim for some reason all of a sudden comes in this year. So it could be a little bit higher or it could be lower. We don't really know until we actually close the year and have everything posted. But it's our best guess based on trending information that we have through June.
Okay, thank you. And then I have one more question, and that was on, let's see, I guess it'd be slide 8. That would be the graph. It'd be the middle slide on page 3. Yeah, that one. Okay, and then you're saying that on fiscal year 13-14 with the $3.41 million, a lot of that's going to licensing and software and new technologies, and there was $1 million and I missed where that went.
So $1 million is, we have the indirect cost plan, if you've heard us talk about 87, which is the cost of doing business. So we charge non-general fund departments an indirect cost or overhead rate for all of the central service departments in the general fund. So the controller's office, the treasurer, grounds, administration, HR, we all do work for all the departments to operate. So not everybody has a checking account or HR department or a treasurer. So there is a cost of our overhead that they are charged. What we've found is as we have reduced costs, we no longer are seeing the revenue. Because historically I charged you $10, but now I had to cut staff. Now it costs me $8. I can only charge you $8.
Okay.
So we're watching that revenue decline because of reduced costs over the years. And so we have seen a decline of $1 million, just over $1 million in general fund revenue from non-general fund departments. So that's that
1.1 plus the 700, and so that's just a gap in the general
we
fund.
had a gap where we just tried to pull money where we could find it in terms of revenue and expenditures and one-time funds, and we still have a shortage of $780,000, I think. And so we just took it.
Okay. Thank you. Any other public comments? Okay, I'm going to bring it back to the board. And the recommendation of the CAO is that we approve the recommended budget as presented. And I want to know if the board wants to make any modifications to what is recommended. So
I'll launch off here. First of all, I'd like to appreciate Lori's approach, as well as the elected officials too. I think we've just got great staff all the way around, and it is tough times, that's for sure. So I just have some changes I would like to add to the budget. First of all, I want to see that consolidation workshop, and maybe we could have it in conjunction with kind of overall cost savings or fee increase or revenue increase. And then I'd like to make a request for regarding Public Works Department. I don't want to see any of the closures of the yards happen unless it comes back to the board for approval and really analyze the savings that we'd have. And I'd like to add the 4 deputies that were requested. and use the road fund to cover the majority of that.
But that's one-time money. You want to use
Well, it's one-time money right now, but it has been reoccurring one-time money. So we need to have public safety taken care of. It's the number one priority, and I think that's a way to do it. And then I would like a technology purchase in the libraries. This great technology called books. From Teeter. It'd be $47,000 in Teeter funds for the purchase of the high-tech books.
the e-books?
No, just the regular books. I'm
just
calling it
book
technology.
library.
Books are now a technology. It's an old technology, but it is a technology. And I think we have to purchase books, and that can either come out of the Teeter Fund or it can come from other office supplies throughout the budget if we want to go through that process. Like I mentioned to Lori earlier on in this discussion, I went through and identified $47,000 of little tiny minor amounts that we take out of each of the departments in the office supplies and services that could add up to $47,000. We're talking about peanuts here, but it is critical for the operation of the libraries. And then also I would like to have the Teeter Fund cover the HR technology purchase. According to that slideshow that we saw, that's going to be a cost savings to the county. So it doesn't make any sense if it's going to actually save us money not to go ahead and purchase it now. So those are my requests to changes in the general fund as well as Teeter. And you're looking at very little actually added to the overall fund there. But I think it does require a couple things and priorities from the board, and those are my priorities.
Supervisor?
Yeah, I have a point of clarification. When you talk about on the deputies and the money from Public Works, is that the VLF you're referring to?
That's what I was referring to.
All right, Lori.
But I'm not tied to that funding. If there's, wherever else we could find the funding, I just know that the deputies are the highest priority there. So wherever you find the 300 or the 400,000, I'm speaking also to the CAO over there. So wherever we find the funding, that's an obvious big chunk of money that covers most of the cost there. Sorry.
That's okay. Could you clarify a little bit about the VLF for me?
So for the last 2 years, the board has elected to provide $350,000 to Public Works. My understanding it goes for a combination of snow plowing, weed remediation along the roads. So it's an additional amount that you've provided for the last 2 years. This would be the second year. That is an annual election you have made to fund that. Again, if you shift that to funding salaries and benefits, that becomes an annual ongoing obligation and clearly adds to the gap that we will be funding into the future. And when we start reducing, again, if we're going to hold the sheriff harmless, it just adds to the amount that we'll have to reduce in other departments to fill that gap. We can't find money. Money is either coming from our ongoing revenues or it's coming from reserves. And that money will be coming from reserves because we do not have the ongoing revenue to pay for those added costs.
Can you tell me what the total VLF is?
I am going to look to my staff, who hopefully has that number in front of them.
Total going to Public Works or total VLF?
Total VLF.
Total VLF revenue. I apologize, I don't have that figure in front of me, but I have it in one of our books.
Well, 350 was what was added back between the recommended final.
800, something like that.
Total VLF is $3.5 million.
$3.5 million? So.
And that is part of the general fund revenue that is funding salaries, benefits, all of those costs in every general fund department. So it's not money that we're getting and putting aside. It's money that we're receiving every year and we're spending every year.
It's a lot more than 350.
But not all of that goes to Public Works.
Right.
Sure.
No.
Sure. No. Yeah.
Only a very small portion
Sure.
of that goes to public works.
And that is being used to already general operations.
So taking it out of Public Works now does what to Public Works?
Reduces their operation and maintenance.
For road maintenance?
Well, if that's your highest priority, that's what it does.
Road maintenance still goes on in homicide.
Tom is coming to the podium. I thought he could answer that most directly.
It's life-threatening.
Honorable Chair, members of the board, clarification on the VLF. Public Works has received approximately $2.2 million in VLF that has been reduced over the last 6-7 years down to 300. Well, in 2011-12 we received 390,000. In 12-13 we received 748,000. So down from 2.2 million to 748,000 for a loss of about 1.5 million dollars. That comes out of our operations budget. Our department. It would be difficult to sustain any further losses to our department without eliminating staff and/or equipment and/or facilities. So our budget as it's presented includes all of the activities that we would be able to do. If that budget is reduced, we will eliminate staff, facilities, and equipment. We can't provide service without funding. That's the bottom line.
The previous year you went from this last year at 748,000, is that right?
In 12-13 we had 748,000.
And the year before that you had what?
392. We backfilled those funds with one-time FEMA dollars. We got reimbursements from that. We also backfilled with Prop 1B. We have been filling the VLF void over the last 7-8 years with Prop 1B funds. Those were one-time bond funds we could use for maintenance and projects. That money is gone. So all we have now is we have no way of backfilling the cuts to the VLF. Any further cuts, we will have to eliminate services, facilities, and personnel.
So the proposed then is currently it's at 748, so taking 350 from that currently? Is that my understanding?
Yes.
And there's also, I don't think that quite covers the 4 deputies.
The 4 deputies are $86,512 apiece. It would cover all of those $4,000.
Yeah.
4 deputies.
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard choice. I agree, but I know that when somebody's breaking in your house in Winton Road, West Point, I know how long it takes for the arrival of the deputies. And if we have 4 more deputies on the street, that means a matter of life and death. And I know roads are also life and death sometimes, but if I have to choose between the two, I'm going to choose the deputies over that. So if there's other ways to find the money, I'm happy to go there too.
Yeah, I have some questions and probably related to the Sheriff's Department, so I don't know who'd like to speak on that behalf. But I'm trying to get a grasp over the number of deputies that we currently have. And what I found during budget session, which is something I wasn't aware of, is the number of deputies that are in various other departments, such as probation, there's AB 109, the DA, understanding the contracts with Maloney's, Comanche, Hogan, the U.S. Forest Service, deputies assigned to court. So I understood there are 17 sworn deputies assigned to patrol. Is that?
I think the number was 18.
18 are assigned to patrol. And so there's, I'm going to say, 6 to 8 other deputies that are assigned to other responsibilities and are held to those responsibilities, i.e. Hogan, Comanche, that sort of thing. So they're not used in a patrol fashion?
Correct. There were impacts there, and those, just as there's impacts on the courts. The AB 109 deputy is funded by AB 109 dollars, but there were impacts at Comanche that was drawing away patrol services. So several years ago, they initiated a contract with us, and they pay for the deputy in the vehicle. As soon as that deputy leaves and starts working somewhere else, that becomes a general fund burden, and we have to pick that money up out of either our overtime budget or some other budget, and as budgets have declined, those dollars disappear.
Okay. And so out of your current sworn, say, patrol deputies, how many openings do you currently have that are funded but not filled?
I believe 2, and there's actually, I think, 1 at this point, and 1 limited term, and the limited term was created when we shifted an employee to the district attorney's office so that they could cover a grant that they obtained. But currently there is only 1 position. When I came before the board a few months ago, I think, had 6.
Okay.
4 or 6.
So you're able to, in the last few months, start filling those positions? Because I know you mentioned background checks and things like that take quite a bit of time.
Correct. It took us, those positions that were filled, if you recall, were approved in October of 2012. And before we could hire those 3 positions, we lost 4 more.
Okay. So it sounds like seems to be as soon as you get ahead 1, you step back 2.
Exactly, and I think when Lieutenant Sewell demonstrated the slide during his portion of the budget hearing, you could see what we were staffed for, but you could see what reality was because of court, illness, training, all the things that occurred during a year cycle of the schedule, which is why I came before you again a few months ago and discussed the option of over-hiring, because where we're at in our patrol slotting isn't actually the folks we have available to us.
Okay. Do you have, with some of these deputies on patrol and stuff, or just maybe deputies in general, with workers' comp and disability, do you have folks who are off on those, and does that I'm sure it impacts, but is that impacting patrol or these other contracts that we have, i.e. with Hogan and Comanche and such?
That's an excellent question. What happens, and I addressed this with the previous board, when the county came to us and they were in some financial trouble and they wanted us to go out and seek and recruit grants, we went out and, contracts or grants or revenue in any way we could get it. We went out and sought that. And what happened was we increased our revenue, which was great, but the problem was it was during the recession. So now that we have those grants or contracts established, we have to pull staff out of your neighborhoods and the most important areas we patrol, and we have to plug them because we're being reimbursed, and revenue is all important. We have to plug them out in these outlying areas. So what happens is our core function, and this is the cannibalization term, those folks get removed and they get sent out because these grants are paying us, and the neighborhoods, our core areas, start to suffer as a result. So that was the negative and downside of establishing contracts and grants at a time when you have your general fund dollars in such a decline, because the reverse happens. And if I were a board member, I would be saying, why aren't the deputies in my neighborhood, why are they out in these contracts?
Right. And so when we go after, or when you went after those particular contracts and such, do you feel that we're getting reimbursed our total cost of what it's costing us to do business that way?
Yes, but during the recession, one particular contract, we started to decline. They actually went from funding 2 full-time positions down to 1. And that obviously hurt us, but we didn't staff it. We said, okay, that's all you're going to get. We've since renegotiated that this year back to an increase to get I think it was 1 3/4 or 1.5 positions back out there. So no, are we subsidizing our grants? No, we've been very careful to not try and subsidize grants and contracts, because we believe the more folks we have in the core and the center of our beat, the better service we're delivering, because that's where most of the crime and most of our calls for service and problems are. It's not that they don't happen out at the contract areas. It's just that they tend to happen a little less frequently.
Okay. So are these contracts renewable annually?
Some are 3-year contracts and some are 1-year contracts. I can tell you we just renewed, I think, 2 or 3 this year. They all kind of tend to come together in a group. There's we're trying to get those contracts to where they're consistent. There's some small variances in them, but when the recession hit, we told all of those contractors and or grantors, we cannot subsidize you in any way, shape, or form. Everything you're going to do needs to be reimbursed. And what they said is fine. When you leave, you're also going to reimburse yourself. So it's kind of a two-way street.
Yeah, that's fair enough. And are all those contracts then, do you work with county council on the contracts?
Yes, and they're brought before the board. They are brought before the board, and we do work with county council. And if it affects another department, we work with them as well.
So what happens if there is an issue, say, in the Comanche area that requires, I'll say, Calaveras County deputies patrol to go to Comanche to support that deputy there?
There's no reimbursement.
Okay.
There's no reimbursement. And the alternative is if we started to try and overcharge them for every time we had to send 5 deputies down there for a major fight, essentially they could close the contract and we would still have to respond to those calls without any type of reimbursement. So we examined a lot of our contracts during the recession because they were causing us some problems in some areas.
Okay. And how do you guys manage overtime? That seemed to be, I know in the budget it was a big increases last year, so how does...
I showed you our policy during our presentation that says we need to have a minimum of 3 on, including a supervisor. That used to be a sergeant. We had actually dropped that down to a corporal level because it cost us more for an overtime sergeant. And we really manage our overtime based upon safety or need. We do a lot of things around deferring calls. Cold calls for service, we'll try and at times hold those so they don't incur overtime. But we really staff depending upon the safety of our employees. We try not to get down below that minimum of 3. And that minimum of 3 is, in my professional opinion, a ridiculous number. But we have some built-in overtime that we have no control over, such as court. Since we don't work a traditional 5/8 schedule, those deputies that would normally be working on weekends and have weekdays off when they have to go to training classes, those courses are offered during the week, so at times we incur overtime there. We flex our schedules a lot. And I have to say, and this is to the credit of our Deputy Sheriff's Association, which I'm not a part of, for the last several years through the recession, they have done a lot of things to defer overtime. They've done an excellent job. And I'm concerned that it's gone on for so many years that they're going to start getting tired of it, and we're going to start to see our overtime increase. Because they've been taking CTO, they've been excellent about flexing their schedules, they've been very, very noble, and they've worked with us, in my opinion, more than they probably should have to defer overtime. Did that answer your questions with overtime?
And well, the other thing too is that if there was the approval of additional deputies, do you see the overtime decreasing in that regards?
Yes, because what we are going to do is we're going to start to institute some cover shifts where you don't have everybody starting and stopping at the same time, and we've utilized this successfully in the past. You'll have some overlap, folks. So if a call comes in at the end of one shift or the beginning of another shift, you don't have this mad scramble, for lack of a better term. You have somebody in an overlap setting that can go and respond to that type of call. The other thing we did to offset overtime, too, is we invested in some technology that was online reporting. Some people really liked that. Some people thought that was very unpopular. That was a difficult sell to the sheriff. But that also has saved us on some overtime.
So do you think you can decrease your overtime by half with the hiring of a couple of deputies?
By half, I don't know. I'd have to do a study. I would love to decrease our overtime, but to actually sit here and try and quantify that this early would not only be premature, I think it'd be completely speculative. Okay. And please keep in mind, too, we're affected by day-to-day overtime and all of the stuff I mentioned to you, but when we have a major investigation, we incur massive amounts of overtime because of our staffing level, specifically in our investigations division. And a couple of those could really knock us off.
Okay. Tell me, how are contracts handled for special events? I know, Lake Tulloch had a special event last year several times, and the fair does. So how does the Sheriff's Department handle that in regards to cost? And
Sure. we try to have a pre-meeting with the event promoter, and if you'll forgive me, I have to go back a few years. I'd come before the previous board and I'd explained some major problems we were having with some special events within this county, and the board at that time did not see those as large of a problem as the sheriff's office did. It was not until the public came in, and I'm going to use another non-clinical term here, heated up the board's seat, that all of a sudden that board at the time decided, wow, maybe this is a problem. So then I was brought back before the board, and we went through item by item some of the problems related to some of the special events. Not necessarily just a Tulloch either. We had some problematic events elsewhere.
Right.
So before, event promoters did not have to follow a permitting process. And Janice can speak to this probably a little more legally than I can, but some event promoters were just out on their own, having an event, and we were responsible for responding to calls and dealing with it. And we handled a lot of those problems on our own internally without coming before the board. When they became a major problem is when we addressed the board, and we started asking for the permitting process through the planning department to be strengthened. If the permitting process was strengthened, that would allow us to comment pre-event and say, you are not going to have this event unless you staff it, unless you reimburse us for calls, equipment, supplies. That had not been happening for several years. And this goes back probably about 10 years. So some of the event promoters didn't believe they needed a permit because of either their existing status of their property or their business or what have you. Some of them did. So originally we used a formula of a 1 deputy per 1,000 or 2 deputy per 1,000 formula, and that did not work very well because some events are very calm and mild and they have well over 1,000 people and we really don't need to be there. Classic example would be a gem and mineral show at the fairgrounds. We don't need to staff those. However, the Sierra Nevada Music Festival, we made 60 plus arrests in 4 hours, and I had 5 deputies injured, 2 of which were out for over a year. That takes a little more than 2 deputies per 1,000. So we had to recalculate that and renegotiate that, and we received a lot of pushback about that contract. The Lake Tulloch issue was yet another thing that we knew it was happening. There was no mechanism to force them to come with us and negotiate, and I had gone through the county process. I had not had a lot of success, so I bit my tongue, went down, talked to the promoter and said, you and I need to negotiate, I meaning the sheriff's office, or I'm going to do whatever I can on behalf of the sheriff's office to recoup costs. So at that point in time, the sheriff ended up negotiating a contract with the event promoter. And I know the board didn't like that, but please keep in mind I came to the board before it came to that. I wanted some help from the board before it came to that. We went back down, got a contract, and it did not cover all of our costs because I had to negotiate with no teeth. I had no planning. I really didn't have a lot of authority to shut the event down unless it became a disorderly house, so to speak. So
the special use permit now in place is a helpful tool to the sheriff's department to be able to meet up front with the promoter to determine what the potential costs might be and that sort of thing.
Absolutely, and we've worked closely with county council recently to end planning to develop I think a much more reasonable permitting and planning process, but I have to tell you that only goes so far as the cooperation of the event promoter. There are people that will constantly try and manipulate the situation. I think the county's in a better place than they were a few years ago, though.
Okay. And then the other question I have is in regards to vehicle expenses in general.
What type of expenses?
Vehicle expenses, yes. So gas and such.
Yes.
So I know the county doesn't have a, quote, fleet program in place, but what does the sheriff's department do in regards to their vehicles with maintenance and purchase of gas and that sort of thing? How do you handle that within the sheriff?
Do you want just what I'm doing now, or do you want any type of history on that?
Just in general now, just to give me an idea about how
what we're doing now, we have a fleet card. We have for fuel, we have a fleet card, and we purchase that fuel at gas stations. We have the deputy try and find the cheapest station that takes that card, and they purchase fuel. There is some sort of tax break on that fleet card, but it's not a big savings. We have discussed with the county before, and it's our opinion it would benefit the county to reestablish a fuel site here at the county. We actually went so far as to have a couple of vendors come in and talk about what it would cost and take to do that. And I know also the Public Works Director has also looked into that before and brought that before the board. But right now we're purchasing fuel through through basically stores with a fuel fleet card.
Okay.
With maintenance, the Sheriff's Department has a mechanic that works over at the Public Works Yard. He services our vehicles, both inside and out. For the items that he cannot accomplish on his own, those get sent out to vendors depending upon the need. And we actually shop that around quite a bit. We've gone to different vendors because they've offered us different services or better service. We use our sheriff's volunteers to transport those vehicles back and forth, so we're not incurring costs of having employees do that. So we try to be as efficient as we can. The bottom line is we've not been able to overcome the fuel price. And we had a slide, and I'm not sure if we showed it during this year's presentation, where fuel had increased significantly. And the only, we sat down and discussed what can we do, and the only thing we could do was to try and get rid of some of the heavier vehicles we have, the trucks, and go down to smaller, more fuel-efficient vehicles for some of our investigators. Our investigators do not like that. They were upset, and I understand why, because they're carrying heavy SWAT gear, bomb stuff, and they're having to go from a full-size four-wheel drive truck to a small sedan. But the problem is our fuel bill was
outrageous.
Yeah.
So basically you're purchasing fuel through commercial gas stations like we would.
Yes, and I think there is a slight incentive on the fuel card. I think we don't pay a certain tax or a portion of the tax, but I'd have to research that a little bit. Right. So there is a slight incentive for using that, but I don't believe it would be near the incentive that it would be to have because we used to have a fuel site here at Public Works, and I think the big concern over the last few years has been the startup costs versus long-term savings, and when it will begin to pay for itself.
Okay. Last question, so I have a better understanding of this too. I see a lot of purchase of cars and requests for cars and this sort of thing. So what determines when a patrol car is just no longer safe or useful?
Sure. There used to be a certain mileage, and I want to say it was around 90,000 miles, that they determined an emergency vehicle should be transferred out and no longer utilized. When the recession happened, I think, and CHP had usually set that standard because when it came to emergency vehicle performance, at least in this state, they tended to be on the cutting edge. But I think when the recession hit, a lot of that fell off the table. We look at how much it's costing us to maintain that vehicle. We look at the safety of that vehicle, how it handles, the suspension, the motor, how likely it is to die during a Code 3 response, lights and siren response. And when we actually have somewhat of an internal meeting between the mechanic, our administrative sergeant, myself, and the patrol lieutenant, we'll discuss a particular vehicle, and we'll look at the history and what's going on, the cost of that vehicle, and we really look at it as a public safety issue. And if we think that vehicle is either costing us too much or it's most likely to be involved in an accident or die running Code 3, we rotate it out. For years we had a lease program where we leased vehicles automatically. Every year we sat down with the CAO's office and leased vehicles. And with the recession, that went away, and we didn't purchase vehicles for about 4 or 5 years. And we did an average last year, and I don't know if anybody recalls, but we were around the average of 100 and, I hate to say, but it was I think we were at 160, 170,000 mile average in our patrol cars, which was very, very high. And unfortunately, again, it goes back to if you don't do things incrementally, you end up with a big price at the end, and that's kind of what we're hoping to come out of. I think we made a small start at that last year.
Okay.
Maybe also on the vehicles, like I said, I'm a kind of a vehicle guru guy. On the heavier or the four-wheel drives, which are needed for snow countries and back roads and that kind of thing, we even took some, rather than buy a new one because they're very, very costly, we even replaced a motor and a transmission if the suspension was good. But what happens after a while, if you go out and drive some of those, they don't handle well. When you're rolling to a Code 3, a really hot call, you start, it starts wandering, that kind of thing, and that's what causes accidents and somebody get killed or something like that. So we've done everything possible. Like for 5 years, we didn't get any vehicles. The only vehicles we did get, if they happen to wreck one or something, we've got a replacement. That's the only reason we got any new vehicles. So what I'm looking at, like I said, we've replaced motors, transmissions, we've done a lot of things to save costs to the county, but it's getting to the point where we can't fix them up anymore.
Okay. I have a question. One more. Probably the sheriff. Has there been any consideration to a work release type program utilizing the jail inmates?
Oh, yes. I mean, we're working on that right now. But one of the problems we have is that if we don't have enough correctional officers, we need at least one to take them out. But that was my biggest goal, was to, for lack of better words, they used to call them a chain gang. Take them out, do whatever we need to do and clean the roads. We take them out now and cut the grass and everything else. And, that's a very high priority to me. Very high.
So if we allocate $350,000 from the VLF fund, which is taken away from Public Works, do you think these folks could perhaps do some weed eating along the county roads?
Yes, we would try definitely. Oh, yes. I mean, that's, like I say, that was my highest priority, was to get them out of the jails, to get them working. They don't tear up the jails when they're out working. When they come home at night, they're tired, and they go to bed. Stay up all night, watch TV, and take apart things and everything else. Yeah, that's very.
They could give back to their community and perhaps learn a skill.
Yeah, and also, at least it gives them some kind of a work ethic when they get out, because they've been working.
Sure. And Sheriff?
Thank you.
The folks that are on monitoring in probation, through probation now, and people that are on probation, could that also apply to them? Because they're early release, right?
Yes. What my main goal is to have some inmates out working from inside the jail, or also the lower level, the low level inmates to work on a monitor, on a ankle monitor. We can work that through with probation to. Instead of us housing them and feeding them and everything else, that they report to the sheriff's office in the mornings, get on a van and go out and work all day, then come back and then you go back home. I mean, that's part of our process too. I'm very big on that. Very big on that.
Well, my question also was, like the AB 109 folks now that are getting early released, is it possible to include them into that program?
Go ahead.
Is that something that I should be asking?
Yes, I want to clarify something real quick that Supervisor Pawnee said. That is going to be funded through AB 109, the inmate work release. It doesn't have anything to do with the 350 that you just discussed.
Okay.
That was the sheriff's priority, and it was the sheriff's priority last year that an inmate work program be developed and put on the street. We've already discussed this with Public Works, as well as I have a long laundry list of other nonprofit and public entities that have requested an inmate work crew.
Right.
The problem is we've been having a very heated discussion with the Community Corrections Partnership to try and get that funded. That was finally agreed and funded upon. The other issue was some minor equipment, which was also been funded. So we are basically in the process of developing that program, and the sheriff is pushing that program very hard.
Okay.
The electronic monitoring folks, it's a little bit of a different animal, but the bottom line is what we're hoping to do is have inmates sentenced to the inmate work program where they show up, they meet up with an employee of our office, they are taken out, they conduct work in the community, they are brought back, and they go home. So they're not impacting us. We're going to have to work with the courts on that, but that's the goal, is to have them sentenced to that program so that they don't cost the jail, yet they're benefiting the community and they're not getting released early.
Can you do another program, though, with the jail?
That is through the jail. That is through the jail.
So what about the folks that are getting released from the prisons and have to come back to the counties?
Okay, those folks are brought back, and in concert with probation, a system is developed, whether they go to the day reporting center or whether they are placed on an ankle monitor or what have you. That is something that when we meet, when an inmate comes out of state prison, we have a discussion about what to do with that person, and we could certainly discuss putting that person into a work program in addition to the day reporting center and what have you. That's something we can certainly discuss and develop. It's just we will eventually be maxed in the amount of people we can have in that program, because somebody has to watch it. We can't send one person out with 100 inmates necessarily, but that is something that's all in the process of being developed. The reason that is not up and running right now is Captain Ballard's having a hard time hiring correctional officers. He had positions approved, and he is struggling just like we were, so that every time there's a delay in the hiring of staff, that delays us in being able to get programs developed and people trained and plugged back into beats.
And also, if the county decides to put together a fleet program, Would the sheriff be interested in joining that?
Fleet program?
Fleet operations program.
Well, as far as patrol cars, we can't really, we can't let somebody else run a patrol car and run it. I don't quite understand.
No. I mean, you'd still have your same maintenance person, but there could be, for instance, there could be minimal and maximum standards for emergency vehicles that you could, like Jim was saying, that you were using the CHP for their standard of maintenance, standard of operations.
We do follow CHP guidelines in some ways because, they put out training bulletins about every month for our mechanic on, how to do something with the cars, modify them so they handle better or they, something like that. I mean, because I ran the vehicles, maintenance fleet for about 3 years when I was an administrative sergeant. And I like vehicles. I got real interest in vehicles. So, we like to follow standard, but we had to, again, like Captain Super said, we had to drop our standards just to keep cars on the road because they wouldn't run their cars.
Right. I'm pretty sure that everybody has.
No, I'm not saying nothing about it. I mean, I'm the one that volunteered to go ahead and put new motor and transmissions in the vehicle between about $6,000-7,000 rather than buy a new vehicle for $45,000 fully equipped. I mean, that was my decision to do that.
It's a good decision.
Yeah.
I mean, that can save a lot of money for a lot of people.
Yeah, one other thing I started a long, long time ago, we went from standard motor oil, went to a vendor, it's called AMSOIL, where we were changing our oil every 3,000 miles and serve them every 3,000 miles. Now we got it down to about, I think it's like 13,000 miles.
Right. So that's
it actually ended up being a cost savings to us. And and the motors last longer, transmissions last longer, everything else. I mean, I did a big study on that with the dealer, and it really, really works. So, but I never brought that up before.
All right, thanks. Sorry, Dave.
No, that's fine. I was finished. Thank you.
Supervisor Spellman, do you have any questions or comments you'd like to make?
Well, I heard some recommendations or requests by Supervisor Wright, but I don't know if my connection isn't. It's not the best audio. I didn't hear either a support or any different ideas from Supervisor Edson or Supervisor Ponte in regards to the things that Supervisor Wright said. But I may have missed it. I don't know.
Okay.
So you're supportive of my recommendations, Spellman?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I heard your recommendations. The other two supervisors following you asked questions and made some comments, but I didn't hear them.
I haven't gotten to the other two yet, Mr. Spellman. I will do that now if you would like to wait.
Sure.
Okay. Mr. Edson.
I support Chris on 4 sheriffs. I would like to take a look at the county trapper and to basically privatize that. And I feel that the county shouldn't be in a position or shouldn't be doing that job. So that would be a $66,000 savings rate. I agree with Lori and administration to freeze all departments' wage increases. No salary upgrades.
We can't do that. We already have a contract.
I'm not talking about the contracted people.
My suggestion was to freeze positions and not fill vacant positions. A soft freeze without a discussion. There are some positions that are critical, that are revenue generators that we're going to have to fill, but to at least have a discussion about them before we filled them.
Okay. So, and I also agree to purchase the HR software through Teeter. And
Books.
That's it. What about books? Books in the library? I think that we're going to give them. I agree with the $20,000 to fund the library from Teeter. As far as the books go, I think we might have to wait like 6 months or so to see our...
What if we give them some money to buy some books?
I have a recommendation on books. Why don't we forego our $3,000 a piece, and that's $15 that can go to books, and then take half the contribution to Meals on Wheels and dedicate that to books.
No, I can do the 3,000 for. I think we should just take I can't take money out of Meals on Wheels because that's food. So, but I like the idea of the 3,000 for the travel expense. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah,
I would agree to that. I think Meals on Wheels serves a lot of the seniors who can't get out, and I can't go for that.
So it'd be 15,000 then, unless the other supervisors also wanted to do that.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, because it's my turn. I support the staff's recommendation for the budget. Last year, this board supported 21 new positions, which is causing a significant impact to why there's such a spread between the green line and the red line. And now this board this year is wanting to add more positions, which will spread the difference between the green line and the red line even more. After listening also to the Public Works Director during that presentation, Mr. Wright said he doesn't want West Point closed, but if we take away $350,000 from the road department, that leaves
just to clarify,
less. It's my turn.
I know, I just wanted to clarify that one point. I'm not saying that don't do it, but just before he does it, bring it back to the board so we can have a discussion about it.
We are now dropping the road fund to $400,000+ to maintain 160 some miles of road. $690,000. Thank you.
No, it's 90 miles of road.
Oh, 690 miles. Okay, thank you. So I don't support that. I do not support, as much as I'd like to support, the funding for the HR system. I appreciated the departments coming in support of HR. Really asked for anything over the last 5-6 years. I do not support that at this time. I do not support buying books for the library at this time. I feel like we can't spend money. Look at that. We just can't. We're spending down the reserves. We have a whole lot of things that we're paying for with teeter that could again happen next year when we look at the loss of A87 for the general fund department. The high priority for me is the jail. This board, whoever the board members were in 2006 or whatever, when we went after AB 900 money, we made a commitment, and as Mr. Kelly pointed out, to the citizens of this county and to the state regarding the jail. Stockton Sheriff Moore just returned $80 million back, I could be a little off on the money, back to the state for expanding the jail in San Joaquin County because he said he couldn't afford to operate it. Well, when we went after the money, the AB 900 money, we never anticipated what would happen to the economy. Everything was going up, and I think Mr. Kelly, addressed that. But we still have a commitment. We have a facility that is going to open in October or so of this year. We have committed to the state, and the state's been very generous, that we're going to open at 65, moving to 80 this year. I agree that we have said 160, and at some point, I'm hoping that we move to that. Last year, we gave the sheriff's office more deputies. That was also part of the 21 positions that the board approved, that we are now, I don't even know how we're paying for it, except that the line's getting wider between the green and the red. And we can't afford it. We cannot afford to spend. I understand what the CAO said about what was your term?
Soft hiring freeze.
Soft hiring freeze. I think an understanding what the sheriff's office, including the patrol and the jail, on how long it takes to get positions, that they should be allowed to continue that process. Captain Macedo answered a question for Supervisor Ponte that they have only 17 sworn deputies. That means last year, if they got 4, they only had 13 sworn deputies. So I know there was more than 13 sworn deputies last year. So, I mean, we can't continue it. And I know having law enforcement and having a number of officers and reducing the response time is important. But so is trying to keep the county out of the track that we're on to, I don't want to use the word, insolvency. But that's what's happening. And every time we spend something, we're moving towards that. I don't want to take $350 away from the road department. We've already, thanks to Shirley's training many years ago, took a lot of the VLF money. I remember how excited I was to get to take
So we could blame
that.
Shirley.
Yes. And the recession. Shirley was the first one to say we were in a recession. So,
I'm in a recession now.
so I mean, I know. So, I mean, I really understand that. And we did have an anomaly last year on cash carry that we're not going to have, I don't think. And even if we have a flat and the assessed value is flat and it's not reduced by 4%, which I think this budget is built on, that doesn't give us the money to spend. The trapper, if I remember, we've already agreed to that contract because the federal government is on a different fiscal year than we are. So we've already approved that $66,000 that's in our, if I remember correctly, our 13-14 budget. And this board was here when we approved the trapper. So we can't keep blaming prior boards. We are the board now. And we did approve that money. And if we choose not to fund it next year, we will have, when the feds come and ask us about funding the trapper, then we have the opportunity at that time not to fund the trapper. But I think we're already committed for this coming year. Am I correct, Shirley? Yeah, we already committed to that.
What's the contract look like? I mean, is it something we can pull out of with a penalty, or I mean, that's what I'm saying. Something we could look at again, since in the context of the whole budget, it doesn't mean we're totally set on that, or maybe it does. That's what's the term of the contract.
It's a contract.
But what are the terms of the contract?
I'm not sure what the
Cancellation terms, I don't know either. We can certainly look at that unless Brian looks like he may know. If he does, he's welcome to come to the podium and speak to it.
Just after Brian, Gary? Oh, go ahead. Sure.
Ms. Callaway, it was not the sheriff that turned the $80 million down, it was the Board of Supervisors. The sheriff did want that money. He did want that jail. The sheriff and I are really close friends. So it was the board that got scared. It wasn't the sheriff turned it down.
Thank you. I'm sure Sheriff Moore appreciates that comment, too. Brian?
Brian Moss, Environmental Management. There is a cancellation clause in that contract, and I don't remember if it's 60 days or if it's 90 days, but there is a cancellation in that contract. So I think that if the board wants to look at that further, we can certainly bring in the feds and do a study session. That's up to the board. I will tell you this. I think it's very important to note that already the agricultural department is $30,000 plus to the good from last year's. Is that correct, Shirley? About $30,000. So they've already made way beyond what would even be considered a 5% cut. So I guess what I'm trying to say is they've done their part and more, and giving that money back to the general fund. So you actually have that 60 plus a 90, you're looking at...
You don't get to lobby anymore, Mr.
$100,000.
Sorry about that. The question had to do with the contract with Fish and Wildlife.
Yes, it can be something that we can look at, and I think it's a 60 or 90-day cancellation.
At this point with the trapper, I'd like to pursue it with the Fish and Game Commission and some others, so perhaps a study session
I think a study session
would be helpful.
I'm not convinced that's where we want to cut either, but I'm just curious about that.
On that, I think it's appropriate that Debbie brings this to the Fish and Game Commission. I think
it's a pretty... I don't know if I would call it a assassin, as it was mentioned in public comment, but I think it deserves some additional study without just dropping the contract.
And so we're already eating into the money. I mean, so the 66 is no longer 66. So the time that we do it, it could be 50.
I don't think we did try about $50,000 a month on $66,000 contract.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
It was a good try.
Appropriate tie for today.
Yes, this is a budget tie. Edward Munch makes his annual appearance for budgets. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. All right, Mr. Spellman, you've heard from all of us. What's your recommendation?
I heard from Supervisor Edson addressing all the points that Supervisor Wright made, and then we had one additional. But either I didn't hear or it didn't happen. I didn't hear anything from Supervisor Ponce regarding the things that Supervisor Wright had suggested.
Pretty good.
Okay, great. Didn't say anything yet. Since he wants to be last, do you want to...
Sure. Okay, I think in general, I made my comments about the trapper. I think that deserves an additional study before that's eliminated. On the library, I'd like to see us give back our $3,000 that's allocated in the budget for travel and give that to $15,000 towards the library services. I agree with Supervisor Wright. Books in this day and age is considered technology. So if we use that from Teeter Fund, or if there's a possibility of somewhere else. I'm also curious about all the various memberships that we're entitled to. I find them weaved throughout this budget, and often I wonder just how much we are paying for RCRC and CSAC and other kinds of memberships throughout the county. So I don't know if there's opportunities there to reduce those costs. I look at things like with CSAC, many of these organizations have different levels of membership, so I'm not saying drop out completely, but I am wanting to take a look to see if there's any ways that we can save there with maybe a reduced type of membership to these organizations, everything from local organizations to statewide organizations. So I would really like some study of that overall to see if perhaps there's a savings there that could be allocated into the library budget. I'm on the deputies. I do support the hiring of deputies. I'm wondering if perhaps a compromise of including 2 deputies now in the prelim budget and 2 deputies in the final budget. It looks like we have a current openings now of 2 that are unfilled, if I heard that correctly. This would give, working on the 2 unfilled now and 2 in the recommended, and see what it looks like for an additional 2 in the final budget. I would agree with the taking of the VLF into Public Works and looking at that funding for the deputy. If the sheriff can get the work release program up and going, so we can support our public works and our roads in the county. I would also strongly encourage a fleet program. I just see all different kinds of cars out there, and it would be nice to be consolidated into one program, you might say, and see if we can have additional savings there. To me, it's very costly to be buying gas out in the community, you might say. At one point, it probably supports the economics of our various communities, but I would imagine we could perhaps save some money there if we could at least buy gas in 1 or 2 central locations that are county maintained. I support Chris in regards to a consolidation type workshop to see where services. I piggyback on that, what Janice had mentioned with, as we move offices around and with the jail moving and tear down the jail or not and who goes into what space. I think it's a real critical time as we look at our space needs to see what can be brought together. I know there are certain work groups that work well together, and perhaps within this work group they can share some administrative costs in regards to clerical and copy machines and things along that line. So, that's, to me, when I talk about consolidation, that's what I'm looking at, to see how we can best utilize our space and our kind of mutual resource needs. I, too, support the HR tech. In this day and age, when we're looking at efficiencies and paper and staff time and that sort of thing, I was very impressed with the HR program. I have such a program in my business, and I could not operate my business the way I do without having that kind of program that kind of weaves everything together. It's a central place. Most importantly, my staff has found it to be very useful, and they have some sense of control over their training as well as their personnel records and easy access for their records and that sort of thing. So for me, that's a necessity for the efficiencies of HR. I think overall it helps to reduce risk and liability, and more importantly, I think it gives employees an opportunity to be a part of their personnel record and be actively involved in that throughout their tenure with the county. So I definitely would support that, and I guess that would be a TEETR fund opportunity there. So I think overall that's what I have, and I just again want to thank all the departments and the chairs of each department for coming forward and presenting some good information to us. I think as a newbie to the board, it was very helpful to hear what works, what doesn't, what the needs are, because I think as a board, I'd like us to have some sort of planning retreat or meeting or something along those lines, because I think we need to come together as a board to determine, are we going to be a small rural county with lots of mom and pop type businesses that we want to see and keep it simple, or do we want to grow to where we start looking at medium-sized industry coming into the county to support our county, to support our economic growth and prosperity. I hear a lot of times, our kids can't find jobs here. Well, do we want to be kind of a sleepy kind of Calaveras County, or do we want to be a proactive kind of county as we look into the future? Over the weekend, I guess many of these tapes were shown on CCTV. And I floated out some ideas out there. I'm not saying I'm supportive of this one way or the other, but one of the things I did speak about to people was it seems like there's a great emphasis on public safety meaning the whole work group of public safety from probation to jail to sheriff to DA, and I'm sorry I've missed anybody in that work group, and roads and public works, and floated the idea of a local sales tax of 0.25 or 0.5% in supporting. And this would be something that would be designated to these two specific areas. I'm not sure how that would work. I'm not sure who chairs a campaign, who gets it on the ballot or anything like that, but there seems to be a general consensus if monies can stay local and support local services that benefit all of us, it seems like a sales tax is something that people seem to be open to. Now, granted, it's a lot of research and a lot of more effort to go into that, but perhaps that is something that we can pursue and have a study session of sorts to see the pros and cons of something like that. But a local tax that would be devoted to specific services for the county, and the two that come to my mind is public safety and public works. I think that concludes my comments.
Okay, Mr. Spellman.
I want to thank all the members of the board. I want to thank all the department chairs, our new CAO, Lori Norton, for the work that they've done to put together all this information and providing this much detail as possible to try to help us make these decisions. I'm gonna give a little philosophical speech for a couple minutes, piggybacking on what Supervisor Ponte just finished talking about, and then go into the specifics. Supervisor Ponte talked about a need for us to determine where we want to be in the future, and there are two separate paths that we have available to us. One is to continue on the same path that we've been on with the same results. One is an alternative path which leads to growth, both in numbers of people in our population, but also in revenue and other things that may have a slight change in the culture of our county. But at this point in time, as strapped as we are financially, seems to be the path that people want to take. In the hopes that as we grow, we will do such with the knowledge of our past, our history, and trying to keep those things intact which make Calaveras County a new place, which I completely agree with. One of the numbers that we got a couple months ago, I think it was during the economic meeting that Supervisor Edson called for, we got down to brass tacks on what percentage of our budget of our operating general fund comes from commercial and retail sales. And I believe the number, if I'm remembering correctly, was about 6% or 4% to 6% of our operating budget. And the general fund comes from commercial and retail revenues. Prior to coming to Calaveras County 10 years ago, in Santa Cruz County and Supervisors, they got 30% of their operating budget general fund came from commercial and retail sales.
Who did, Mr. Spellman?
City of Modesto.
Got 30% of their revenue from retail sales?
Commercial and retail sales. So when we look to our north in Amador County, we look to our south in Tuolumne County, they have similar commercial and retail sales opportunities like Santa Cruz County and other places too. So the only way that we're going to be able to get ourselves out of the fiscal hole is to keep money inside the county. I mean, everybody that has children like I do, like Supervisor Wright does, and many other people on our staff at the county and throughout our population, I've said this for this is my first budget cycle. I'm not trying to beat a dead horse or be, corny, but I can't buy a pair of underwear in the county for my son or my dad. I can't buy underwear. I can buy him a pair of Wranglers at Turner's and Angels can't buy
more information than we need, Mr. Spellman.
We're outside stores, so.
What's
Nothing.
Go ahead.
Every time we go outside the county to buy a pair of socks, a pair of underwear, other things that we can't get inside the county, we not only add to the carbon footprint that is onerous to environmentalists, but we're also spending our tax dollars in somebody else's county that helps fund their sheriff and their roads. When I take my Ford Explorer to Stockton or Lodi and back, I spend $20-25 in gas plus another $10-15 on McDonald's or whatever we eat when we go shopping there. And that's like $40 to $50 that I could save my time and my money and buy those things in Valley Springs or Clockwood or Angels, wherever the most appropriate place is to put something like that. And we would get the revenue. Our residents would have a better quality of life, not having to travel those distances every time they want to make a purchase of that sort. It just doesn't make any sense in 2013 that we have to do those type of things. So what we're seeing here is we're seeing a decline in revenue, and this is something that's endemic. It just didn't happen just in the last couple of years. It's just been brought to the forefront because of the economic downturn. But it's not like the issue is brand new. It's been around for a long time. So when we talk about where we're going to get the money to fund the things that we want for our county, I think that there are some things on the horizon, both not commercial so much at this point in retail, but a little bit of that, but also some industrial development, light industrial, job development that I know that people are working on behind the scenes. And I'm very excited because we're at the point right now where we're forced to make a decision. It's not, we can't play shell games anymore. We can't take money from one-time funds or money that got squirreled away. That's coming to an end. I mean, the one-time funds that we're going to approve to get through this year and maybe into next year, we're going to exhaust those most likely, according to the CAO and others that have given testimony to that extent. So we're basically forced into a position where you're going to send Calaveras County backwards in terms of goods and services and what we can provide in the quality of life. You're either going to send us backwards, or we're going to have to move forward with some different thinking. And I think that forward is what the public wants. In fact, I know that's what they want. And I believe that this board, that these three new elected members, represent the will of the people, represent that they are ready for a shift and a change. Doesn't mean that it has to be a nuclear type change where everything changes overnight, or that it's something that we don't want. I don't think anybody wants that. But I'm very optimistic about our future based on the comments that I've heard from our new supervisors, who I believe are voicing the concerns and the wishes of the people who put them in office last November. And to that extent, I support everything that Supervisor Wright suggested. And I would remind the board and those present that are listening that we also had, as part of our deliberation, commentary about what percentage of our workforce of county employees are at or near retirement age where they could retire at either any day now or within the next 5 years. When I worked for the school district, worked for several, it was very, very common for their total budget for their staff, salaries and retirement, their staff and benefits pay, they consumed 80 to 90% of their operating budget. And that is because the state mandates that there has to be a certain ratio of teachers per student. Well, there's no state mandate that says there has to be a certain ratio of police officers to residents. But you know what? In my opinion, there damn well should be. And the people have spoken. They want law enforcement as their number one priority. And I heard Supervisor Wright when he asked about the 4 deputies, and then the follow-up conversation about whether it was going to come from public works or how we were going to cut that. And I believe that come from Public Works, so be it. If we can find it somewhere else, we're welcome to entertain thoughts on that as well. And I agree with that 100%. We need to fully fund, to the extent that we can, request the sheriff's office, and then wherever else that we need to make adjustments to make that happen, so be it. And if we need money to shore us up so that we can draw that green line and the red line close to each other looking forward for our future projections for fiscal responsibility, then we need to approve industrial and commercial development in our county in the appropriate locations that provide for jobs and tax revenue. That's the way I see us moving forward, and I believe that's what I heard from our newly elected supervisors, which in turn is the voice of the people who elected in November, and I support those things.
Thank you, Mr. Spellman. Okay, you've heard from the board. Do you want to feedback? So we make sure we're all on.
So I didn't realize that we could actually comment on the future of the county. And I mean, one of the reasons what I ran for this office, because in my business I could see the deterioration of not only our public safety, but the business that's going on in the county, and the businesses that are here. Well, not all of them, but most of the businesses that I come across are continuing to decline and struggle more and more. And there are a couple of things that makes a difference. One are regulations that prevent things from happening here in the county and prevent from us bringing in revenue through jobs and industry is taking its toll now. We have so many things that prevent things from happening here. I kind of understand that, because really, I don't think anybody knows what Calaveras is going to grow up to be. There's no real clear picture of that, and I would like to help develop that, and so that we can stop being afraid of growing and just go there. Because we're dying at the vine right now. And there are a lot of people out here, volunteers, trying to make things happen in the county through to keep the libraries going, to keep the veterans going, to keep our senior citizens open, the senior citizens groups open. And all of these things are becoming more and more reliant on just fundraising, because we don't have any money. We can't even afford right now. Look, you can see what's happening here, right? Well, in a business, if you can't find a way to create revenue, then you close your business. And I could see the county, that's the way it's going right now. So we also have the power to help that, and that's one of the reasons why I want to do the economic development study session. It wasn't necessarily just because nobody else has done it before, but to bring it up so that people can start thinking about that, and what can we do in the county to make it easier for businesses and for our economy to grow. It isn't the status quo. That doesn't work. Mr. Spellman said, just like he said, everything that we've done so far, we're doing a great job on sustaining, and the departments are doing a fantastic job. One of the things that I noticed when I came here was each department is very serious about what they're doing, and they're trying to do the very best they can for the general public who they work for. No doubt about that. The sheriff department is working their tails off, trying to do what they can for the best thing for the public. Board of Supervisors here, I believe, are doing the same thing. But we're revenue poor. We can't move forward unless we take steps to release some of the opportunities that could come into the county, and then we'll start paying for our services at that point. Counties around us are doing that. I'm not in favor of the big box store, Calaveras County. That's not what I want to see the future to be. So somewhere along the line, we need to take steps to develop what we need to look like for each of these communities and go for it instead of just worried about what might happen. So it's one of the things I'm passionate about. That's why I ran. No other reason, really. Didn't run about, to be up here talking to everybody about this. Consider that in the future where we go. Public safety is number one in my mind right now. When I see some of my friends that are 80, 70, and 80 years old getting robbed or burglarized in their homes, that's devastating for them. It has more of effect than just saying, oh, they got burglarized. It traumatizes them. It traumatized me when I got burglarized at my house. At my restaurant, I'm kind of used to it. But at my house, when I got burglarized, that has an effect. It makes you feel like you can't even leave your house even for a minute. You're afraid somebody's going to come in. Sheriff Coon's got the same thing. So we need to take a stand and try to figure out a way to clean up our act around these burglaries and the things that are going on in the county that prevent our citizens from feeling safe. The other thing is I just recently had a conversation with a person that acquired some properties here in the county through somebody passed away and then he inherited it. So he came over here to take a look at it because one of his options were to reinvest or invest further into the county, and so that he could, he's already got 5 homes or so, and so why not invest further? Well, he took a look around. He says, I'm going to go somewhere else. They're going to go up for sale, and I'm going to go somewhere else. And the reason is because of our situation here. They don't feel safe here, and so part of our problem is when businesses want to come here and they see bars on the windows or they see an unsafe situation for their business, they're not going to want to come here. And we need to make that change. So I feel that our sheriff can do that, but he needs the tools to do it. The other thing we need to do is we need to educate our folks at a very young age and try to help them to come up to the citizens that we want them to be. And we need also to retain our best young people. Instead of sending them out of the county like we do right now after they graduate from school. Take a look at it. We had, 600 kids graduate from the high school? How many of those people, those talented, smart people, do you think are going to stay here? So it's one of the things that we need to work on here to improve our economy. And our economy drives this. It's the only way we can make the difference is by improving those things. All things that we're working on. Thanks.
Okay. Would you like to, CAO, how would you like to do this? Would you like to feedback or have one of your staff members?
I'd like to walk through the items that I've heard some level of a consensus on to determine whether we have 4 votes for those items. And I would, through the chair, like to ask one question, if it's acceptable, of the sheriff. We received a request this morning for minimum level of funding for the jail at $450,000 above what is in this budget. I just want to know whether that is what is going to be required to open the jail this year, because that will require $450,000 additional dollars in addition to what you're discussing here today. So I just think we need to put that on the table also and discuss that.
Brandon, come up here, but that was a full year, the 400 and some odd.
Exception services supplies is half year.
Okay, was exception services and supplies a half year.
There's a slide on the board for the
when you look at this,
During the budget presentations, I tried to express the best I could of what a jail needs in order to operate. A jail is very unique. It's different than a lot of other things. I have what are called fixed post positions, and fixed post positions require somebody standing in that position 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Absent that, then, I mentioned deliberate indifference to you, and that's the point where we're at, where we get sued and all that stuff when an inmate gets hurt or an officer gets hurt. To effectively open that jail with the commitment that we made to the public, and I'm still going to do a staffing study for you, I hope, to show you where we got between now and final budget, to start with 80 in there and to operate the jail in the most efficient manner that I can without a huge impact on your budget process and your decision making. I need the tools in order to do that. I sat down with my administration yesterday. We went through the complete staffing study of the jail. I've done these staffing studies to boards since 2006. I've been doing staffing studies. I know what it takes to run a jail, to live up to my goals and commitments in the jail through the sheriff in order to protect public safety, to prevent those burglaries, to keep people in jail, to hold them accountable, to do those types of things. And looking at the schedule, I went through yesterday with my staff. The minimum, in addition to what you guys gave me last year, is 3 additional correctional technicians and 2 additional custody officers. Even with those people there, I could operate my jail to the minimum standards that I need to in order to protect those rights of those inmates and the safety of my staff and hold them accountable. And I can keep my lobby open for 2 shifts, days and swings, but it would be closed at midnight. But right now the goal is to operate a jail at 80 inmates. And exponentially, as we grow, in looking at what, and I'll take you through the staffing study, but as we grow in populations and through pods, the staff doesn't increase a whole bunch, 15 for, another 48. There's a finite process and a formula that I can demonstrate to you of what that need means when we do our staffing study. This is, and I'll tell you right now with absolute confidence, I'm sure that I could, barring any unforeseen circumstances, I can't tell you what DSCC is going to say when they get there, but I can operate my jail with this. And then we can move forward from there. So that's where I'm at and comfortable in saying.
So thank you very much. And the reason I wanted to put this before you is because my understanding is that this is going to be another added cost that is not in the budget, that is critically necessary for the sheriff to be able to fund their operations.
But we're going to be able to, sorry to interrupt, but we're going to have, because I see in your slide 15 here, that's part of our next kind of steps. Is first on the agenda is having that study session so we can have a better understanding of the costs, correct?
It is, and if these costs are real, these costs would start occurring July 1st, which is a couple of weeks, and again would be in addition to anything that is in the recommended budget.
In an ideal world, we would have already had this study session before so it'd be all in the budget next.
So I'd like to walk through what I hear agreement on, and just
and am I done?
Yes.
Okay. Did you hear the passion of my voice? I'm not very loud normally, but this is something that needs to be done.
Hey, Ed.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry. You said your lobby is open a certain amount of hours?
Right now we're open 24 hours a day based on the physical plant. When we get to the new jail, originally, and I'm going to give you the complete history, that last staffing study that we did only allowed the lobby to be open for 8 hours or for day shift. Operationally and for the benefit of the public, it should be open 24 hours a day. I did my absolute best in this without a relief factor, with kind of operating exactly how I am now, trying to use cover, to get 2 shifts. So sorry, 16 hours a day. Long way of answering your question.
And we'll go into that more in detail.
I have a question, because numbers are very different from the numbers that we handed out.
That's right.
Right, and that's,
So I just want to make sure.
They're extremely, yes,
New jail.
yes.
So before we go into this, because we're going to do this in a study session, number one, the clerk needs a 5-minute break, but I'm going to make one pitch that I'd like to at least have us consider before we go into our 5-minute break. If these costs are going to be in addition to what is before us, and I believe that the sheriff has done their best job to sharpen their pencils to the degree they absolutely can to get down to what is necessary to run the jail once it opens. There's $1 million that is at risk. If we do not staff that jail appropriately when it's opened at the 80-bed commitment,
$1.2 million.
we're going to lose $1.2 million. Thank you for that clarification. So I would just make my final pitch that if the board is going to add something to the sheriff's department, which I'm hearing very clearly they want to do, that you look at this and think about this. I would suggest that allowing the sheriff to operate at full staffing complement, and I recognize they haven't been for a period of time, if we could allow them to get to full staffing complement on the patrol, the deputy side, and in the dispatch area, and see how that works before we add resources there, because we are going to have to add these resources in order to get those funding back.
I mean, they're not operating anywhere near full capacity with the amount of deputies they have right now. That's the whole point. If they were, we wouldn't be adding deputies. Nobody wants to add deputies at the expense of the rest of the county. It's the fact you have to have them because there's a public safety concern out there.
And I do understand that. I just know that they've been operating with, my understanding is they had 6 positions that were vacant. They filled 3 of those. They're in the process of filling 2 more of those currently. If we could get them up to that full capacity and somehow allow them to stay there, and I recognize that as soon as they hire, they turn over. It's not ideal. It's currently allocated positions. That's what I mean. So that's my final pitch. And if we could take a 5-minute break, then I'd like to run the board through all of the items that it appears there's some level of consensus on so that we can get a vote and so that staff is clear what we should include in the recommended budget.
5-minute recess.
Thank you.
Could you come up to Spellman?
Mr. Spellman, we're going to restart. Yeah. Are you still there? Yep, I hear you. Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to reconvene the meeting, please. And I'd like the CAO to feedback to make sure we're all on the same page on this.
Okay, first, I believe we need to close the public hearing.
Yes, please. Thank you for reminding me. I'm going to close the public hearing on the budget.
So I'm going to go through 3 parts. First, Ms. Ryan is going to put up on the screen the general fund financial ads. I just want to walk through those to make sure that we have agreement that these are what we want to add to the recommended budget. Then I'm going to go through the non-financial items just to make sure there's agreement before we take action on them. And then finally, there's also some financial ads outside the non-general fund that the board needs to consider. So the first financial ads in the general fund are the 4 deputy sheriffs at $86,500 a piece, I believe that says. And the recommendation is to transfer $350,000 from Public Works that has been used in the last couple years to supplement road funds to offset the costs of those 4 deputies. There was also an alternate suggestion that we fund 2 of those positions now and wait till final budget to fund the other 2 positions. What is the pleasure of the board?
Yeah, that looks good. I agree with that. Hard choices, but I think it's the thing we have to do. I do have I'd like to have a discussion about the Public Works budget, upcoming budget at the board level workshop with the rest of the board.
What do you mean?
Well, I want to see where the savings comes from at a board workshop.
The savings for...
The $350,000.
You mean the impact of Public Works?
Yeah, I want
to take it?
Yeah, I want to see. I want to have the board give direction to the department directly in a workshop if the rest of the board feels that's appropriate.
So just so I'm clear, what we're adding to the budget, are we adding 4 positions or are we adding 2 positions? We need direction from a majority of the board.
I'm in favor of that. 4.
Debbie?
The 2 at recommended and 2 at final is what you're asking, or all 4 now?
That's what I'm trying to get clarification on. Are we putting 2 in the recommended budget or are we putting 4 in the recommended budget?
I'd go for the 2 now and 2 in the final.
I say 4 now.
Mr. Spellman? Pardon?
I concur with Supervisor Edson, right?
So 4. I'm for none until we get to the final budget. So it's adding 4 now.
Okay, so the next item on the agenda is the library books. I believe the final suggestion, or the suggestion we heard some concurrence around, was taking the $3,000 apiece that we put into the budget this year for the board members to be reimbursed for the cost of their travel and using that $15,000 to fund library books.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Mr. Spellman?
Yes.
I'm a no.
Okay. The next item on the agenda is the HR software. That would be including that in the recommended budget at $147,984 and taking the funding from Teeter to support that.
Yes.
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 Mr. Spellman?
Yes.
I have a question about that, though. Because Francine said that it's going to produce a savings over a period of time. So I'm wondering if that money can replace where it came from.
So my understanding is that it was presented that it will result in savings. There's also a $76,000 a year cost to maintain that, as I understand, an ongoing annual licensing. I do not believe we are going to see hard reduction in the budget as savings. I think what we may see is improved efficiencies, and when we are cutting the budget, which we're going to be doing, maybe we will be able to make some reductions and the technology will replace. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, there will be some hard savings as well, but we won't have it in the first year to fund anything, that's for sure.
I don't support it at this time. I would look at it at final budget.
So moving down to the wildlife services contract, I believe we saw concurrence to defer that action until there's some additional information available to the board on that. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. The jail funding.
Wait just a minute. Debbie, yes?
Yes.
Bruce?
Yes.
Cliff?
Yes.
Spellman?
Yes.
I'm a no.
The jail funding I put up just as a placeholder. Again, that discussion will be coming back to the board because my understanding is that's a need for recommended budget. So those are the general fund financial adds. In the non-financial area, I have a request from the CAO to implement a soft freeze. And what I mean by that is a discussion with HR and our office before vacant positions are filled to make sure we all are in agreement that they are critically necessary before we add positions that we may be cutting in the future.
That doesn't mean, though, that you come back to the board with each time. It's a decision made internally between you, the department, and HR.
It would be, and department heads always have the ability to grieve a decision or to ask for the board's input on a decision. Yes.
Mr. Moss. Okay. Debbie?
Yes.
Yes. Spellman?
Yes.
I think I voiced my concern on those positions that take long time funding. We should be, and since you and the HR manager are going to be involved in that, I think you understand the importance of that.
Understood.
When we had that before, it created a lot of bureaucracies. So when the sheriff's department and other departments have come up about the slowness of their vacancies and us being able to move, by doing this, I want you to understand that it will slow the process down by several weeks, because it has to go from our office to their office, back to our office, paperwork. And so I just want to reiterate some of the things that we're trying to eliminate.
Maybe you and the CAO can eliminate some.
But we're not
of that.
doing a soft freeze in the sheriff's department because we just approved 4 different new positions. Right?
Okay, so it's a soft freeze for everything but those and the jail as well?
I would limit it even further. I would say general fund, and clearly understanding that the board's priority is public safety and that they are adding positions to the sheriff. I would say that those would, unless they're a non-sworn officer or something else, that we would consider those critical and be moving on them immediately.
Okay.
How many positions do we have?
Right now, we have quite a bit. I understand we have 24 positions we're recruiting for. We have several retirements that we know are in the works, at least 4 or 5. So I'm just trying to point out to you that when we've done this in the past, we either have a hard hiring freeze and we don't fill vacancies, but the soft one creates a lot of bureaucracies and paperwork and totally slows things down. And so, I mean, we're trying to look for efficiency. So we just want to make sure that maybe when it comes up, that it was 2-3 weeks before we can even start the process, that you're aware of that. Because that's sort of what we're trying to get rid of with the software as well, is to have departments take a look at what they have to make those decisions.
Thank you, Francine. That's kind of double whammy.
Yeah, I'll support that.
I need to understand what that means, because you bring up things that we're trying to eliminate, these kinds of slowdowns, bureaucracy or whatever. So by us saying, yeah, we support a soft freeze, so if somebody's in the pipeline now and they're about ready to be offered something, are we saying no if it's not a high priority position?
So I am not trying to create bureaucracy in any manner, shape, or form. I don't know how they've implemented this program in the past. I don't see it being a paperwork-driven process. I see it that before we open in a recruitment, the HR director, myself, and the department head involved in that, general fund only, have a serious conversation about whether it's a critical position to be filled, or knowing that we are going to be coming back to this board and talking about substantial cuts in the general fund, we decide collaboratively to defer filling that position.
So the 24 that are in the pipeline now would not be considered in this proposal because we haven't recruited yet?
I don't know how many positions are in the general fund that we're currently recruiting for.
And that's how it's happened in the past. So I think it is important that we have discussion, however you decide. When we've done this before, if you actually have not made the offer of employment, those positions could not be filled. They're also, and it doesn't mean that we have to use the exact process we did before, because clearly that did not work. It was a piece of paper that had to be generated that basically went to the CAO's office, then came to HR, then once the decision was made, went back to the department, who has to fill out paperwork to request where they would like the position to be filled, how they want it. It's their money, how they want it expended. So you're talking, depending on where it gets delayed, and if you have meetings, I mean, it definitely puts a brick wall in front of...
Well, I'd make a suggestion is that maybe you work with this, like Marita was saying, work out the details and then come back to the board for the...
That's clearly...
I like Mrs. Norton's idea. I worked out with her. I don't think we need to be involved in that.
Okay.
I think the reality is...
Well, can I make a statement on that?
Just a moment.
Hang on.
Just a moment.
department heads need to understand we are in a precarious situation right now. There are going to be some big agonizing decisions that are going to have to be made by this board over the coming years, including this year. And the bottom line is, the department heads really need to evaluate the fact that when, not if, but when that trigger is pulled, and we do have layoffs, because we're going to. I don't know, unless someone's playing Powerball and going to decide they're going to donate all that money to the county to bail us out of the issue that
I'm doing that.
Yeah, okay, good. There's going to be layoffs. So the department head really has to evaluate when that trigger is pulled, is that position, are they going to be getting a layoff notice?
But in the past when they've done that, and I will commend department heads, part of the reason most of us lost a lot of positions on top of layoffs was the fact that we did not fill vacancies. And department heads make those decisions. They know their budgets, and they did a really good job. It's part of the reason we reduced our expenditures. And so they did not fill because they don't want to fill positions that they have to lay off. They know which ones they need to fill. And I think they did do a very good job with doing that. What happened was when we kept those positions on the list and unfunded, and then they were deleted, then that's when the problems occurred. Because of the system.
Thank you.
So,
I'm actually,
it's Mr.
well, I'm actually going to speak instead.
And speak instead of him?
Yeah, sorry, Darren. You're not here. I do think we should go slowly here because doing a soft freeze across the board may not be the best way to do it. I think we need to look at department by department and really analyze it before doing a soft freeze all the way across.
That's what
Is that what you're
just
suggesting?
general fund, just each position. She's talking only
We're going to review
general
it?
fund. We're not. General fund department.
We are through her. Correct.
That is my suggestion, and my hope is that departments, even knowing that that's part of the process, will not come to us and ask for positions that are not critical. And I believe that to be true. As Ms. Osborne has pointed out, this is really symbolic in nature, but it's to make people really stop and think about whether to fill a position when we're going to be, as Ms. Callan stated,
as long as there's discussion there, I just didn't want to across the board. So, okay, just wanted to understand.
Okay, Mr. Spellman.
Sorry, Darren.
Darren?
You ready for me?
Yes, please.
Well, I don't know. I'll have to ask Mr. Wright. Go ahead.
I just wanted to go back and reiterate what J.O. Norton had said, and that was that it was just a deferment of positions other than critical, and the board has determined that critical at this point is the 4 deputies for the sheriffs, and we don't want to hold up the recruitment process any longer than possible or than necessary for that, because that is a very long process to go through that recruiting process with the background research and all those type of things like that. So if I'm understanding her correctly, that we would move forward, with the critical positions and include the 4 deputies, and the others would be the effective the other way.
That's correct. Okay.
I support that.
Thank you.
So moving on, and these are just...
Captain Ballard, did you want to say
I
something?
just want to point of clarification, too, because I know everybody's going to be coming to you and saying this is critical, but, I've invested a lot of time and money in certain people to fill my positions that, are critical from last year's budget to fill. So the positions I got outstanding, I need to get filled. That's my belief. So.
And he has a lot of interviews he's going to be doing.
Got 21 of them today.
Yeah, you go. Okay. No, we've closed the public comment, Peter. Sorry.
I'm going to move quickly through these. I'm not sure they need a vote, but I just want to make sure that you know that they're on our list. Memberships, we're going to be taking a look at dues payments and see if there's a way to reduce those. Local sales tax measure, I heard that the board may want to have some discussion about that at a future date, so we can talk about that.
Do you want to have a discussion?
Well, if we can have a discussion.
Just a minute, Mr. Spellman.
If we can have a discussion about public works, then I'm willing to have a discussion about the tax.
Okay, what about you? Mr. Spellman?
Yes.
Do you want a study session on a sales tax initiative?
I think the sales tax is fine, but, you know, if there's a majority of the board that wants to venture into that.
There is 3 votes for it. Are you going to be vote for?
Well, certainly worth looking at and having discussion. I mean, discussion doesn't preclude a raising of the sales tax. Perhaps we might decrease it. So,
Well, we
I'd be
can't.
willing to discuss it.
We can't do that, Mr. Spellman, because that's up by the state. If we want to raise it, it has to go to the public at a 2/3 vote. Okay, just as I'm a no on that study session. If Supervisor Ponte would like to put a group together and maybe come up and maybe make a proposal, I think this needs to have some vetting through our own resources, our different community groups, business groups, before it comes to the board. So I don't support a study session, but there is 4 votes to have one. Thank you.
I have all the technical information on doing something like that.
Maybe you can share it with Supervisor Ponte. Thank you. Mr. Garcia.
Madam Chair, Public Works went out previously as part of addressing the shortfall of the RIM fees on ways to make up that shortfall, and a sales tax initiative was one of those things that was brought out to the public. We did numerous public meetings in all of the communities, and it was it did not receive any support. People love the roads, but not enough to increase the sales tax. The concerns were the adjoining counties would have to be part of that. Otherwise, Calaveras would lose business to Walden and Amador and the Central Valley.
We would lose business?
Yes.
People would shop where it is
Do we have
cheapest to
business
shop.
now? Yeah, that's wondering what business are we? Because our business is going there.
I shop local. Thank you all very
The
much.
complaints from the local business owners were that we were putting them at a greater disadvantage.
Tom, when was that? About what?
That
When
was
did you do that about?
in 2010, I believe, is when we wrapped up that. Thank you.
But that doesn't mean that, I mean,
It's a study session.
if Supervisor Ponte said there's support in the community, I mean, for me, I'd like to go talk to the business associations in my district before we even have a study session. But there is 4 votes to have a study session on it. Okay.
I took notes on the fleet program. That's already on our list of things to do. My understanding is the board has already voted on it. Mr. Garcia is coming back in August, not July, to present some information on a fleet program.
At the same time, can you do that?
Public Works yards,
Yeah.
that's the next item on my list of things that you've asked to come back to the board before there are any closures of the Public Works yard. And there may be a need for a revision to Mr. Garcia's budget in total as a result of the 350 reduction. So those are the non-financial things that I heard that we wanted some follow-up.
Just a moment. Mr. Garcia.
I would encourage something a little sooner than August or final budget as to address the shortfall or the reduction in Public Works, as if we have a budget that has that $350,000 in it, if it is gone, then we are expending those funds through that 6-month period. So I need to make the cuts, and I need to make them
If the board
now.
doesn't have a problem, let Mr. Garcia work with the CAO in establishing either a study session or an agenda item. I'll leave it up to the CAO to make that decision. Thank you, Mr. Garcia.
And now for the non-general fund financial aid ads, and this is these are expenses that we need to add to the non-general fund budgets in the recommended budget. I'm going to let Ms. Ryan go through them and describe for you what they are and why this is necessary.
There were a number of requests by regional funds with major expenditure costs, and CalWorks was looking for positions funded by 3 of those positions in contact, 1 eligibility worker and second level 4 with their local funding sources. They are also looking for implementation of the Affordable Care Act, which will be all federal dollars, 1 eligibility supervisor and 7 eligibility workers in the office tech. So what this will require is a change to the position control list that would be brought forth by HR to add these positions. Ms. Wiki, the director of Car Works and Human Services, spoke to more regarding them and spoke that they had not yet received the allocations and they would only be filled at the levels that the allocations would allow. That they are necessary to be approved prior to final budget because the deadlines for opening the call center and start taking applications under the Affordable Care Act is October 1st.
And then that's only if we receive the funding.
Right. This is only approving the positions at the moment. Then she's also asking for capital assets, 2 vehicles, and a copier. Public Health, Ms. Tracy, Director of Health Services, has requested a half-time FTE emergency preparedness manager, again funded with Public Health. And mental health, she's asking for 2 vehicles. The Public Works has asked for a series of capital assets, service truck for equipment services, for roads and bridges, a generator, a water truck, a transport truck, and 3 car equipment retrofits. How those may be affected by the loss of the $350,000 of DLF funding will require some conversation between myself and Mr. Garcia. And the transit bus for transit and integrated waste management that would be funded with solid waste is a 1.0 FTE operations foreman for landfill and 1 water truck, 4 scraper tires, and a transfer truck.
Shirley, I have some questions. So the funding sources are all those that have been identified. So I see this as capital, but I see where there's FTE in Public Works. So how is that?
That's not the capital. The capital assets have been identified as capital assets. This is a position of full-time equivalent operations foreman.
Okay.
So this would be adding a position to position control list, much like the public health position, half-time FTE, and the positions for Car Works.
So new positions is what's identified here in capital
assets.
So just to clarify, like going back to the Public Works position, is there a way to transfer positions within the county? So if you needed to make cuts at the the general fund for Public Works, could you move that position, that person over to that position if they were qualified?
If this position was open and you had somebody that was being laid off in the general fund, they certainly could apply for that position, yes. I believe HR during the times when we had write-outs looked for areas where there were vacant positions that needed filling in. When those positions, they would then see among the laid-off employees who might fit into those and try and bring them back on board.
Okay, thank you.
So if the board wants to go through these one by one and say yea or nay, or do it in that, either way is fine.
What's the pleasure of the board?
I have one question. Is there, because of these added positions, if they are actually funded and filled, would there be an additional A87 cost that would go to the county so we'd increase that revenue source coming into the county?
Actually, let me take this one. Actually, it's a benefit to the county. These departments pay A87.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to ask.
So when they are adding resources,
right.
Now we can only charge them the cost. So if we are reducing our administrative departments that are charging out those costs, so they don't have the real cost to bill. But adding resources gives the external departments more of an ability to pay. But again, we can't charge them more than it costs us. So if we're reducing HR analysts, for instance, just as a for instance, if we're reducing the HR department more broadly, their ability to charge out goes down. because they no longer have the expense to recover.
But the proportional share paid by the town works will increase.
That's what I was
Right, but
I have a comment on that.
Just a moment. Okay.
you're adding, so the fact that you're adding 4 deputies and you're adding, which are general fund, okay? And then you're adding How Works will actually, they will have an increased proportional share, but that will be partially offset by the increased proportional share of the sheriff's department that we do not collect 80% on.
Yes.
So it impacts the general fund departments, the central service departments, but sometimes it can impact us in a not so great way because we still have the resources that we have and we're only going to be receiving maybe 20% of.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Spellman?
In the discussion of 87 costs and billable hours and billable services, I want to step back to the CIO's office in terms of their responsibility at this point in time for taking care of Parks and Recreation. I would like to see some money allocated to the CIO's office to be able to do continued oversight on Parks and Recreation so that they can have the ability to bill aids that have cost the public works and any other department that might be involved in making sure that we have at least a documentable 1.0 FTE person that could be in charge of making sure that the Parks and Rec is taken care of. One of the quickest ways that we can create revenue is through a regional park in conjunction with PCWD and the Army Corps of Engineers developing a flood basin recreation area. But that requires that we have oversight by the county for maintenance of the to take care of the lawn and to take care of the bathroom, different things like that once that park is created. So in the context of the 87 charges, I'd like to see some money allocated so that there could be someone to expand the Parks and Recreation oversight under the CAO's office umbrella so that we could go after grant funding and other sources of funding to create that park.
First of all, Public Works does not have anything to do with Parks and Rec, but that discussion, you might have part of that discussion with the CAO prior to final budget. We've had that before. We have a Parks and Rec Commission, and I don't know if Shirley charged her time to it. I think she just gave it to us for free. But the Parks and Rec Commission only had Prop 40 that they were responsible for overseeing. But I think your recommendation is a good one. I'd recommend maybe you talk to Lori before final budget and see if there's a way we can, because I'm not real clear what all that means, because we do have a small mechanism through planning to, I can't remember what it's called. Quimby. But let's defer that to final budget.
I just wanted, can you email me that list?
Okay. Shirley, do you want to, is there any more on that? Pleasure of the board, did you want to go say yes, yes, no, no on these, or just do they're all non-general fund? Are you supportive of what's being recommended?
I'd like to do each one individually.
Okay. Could you speak? He wants to do each one individually.
Okay. The contact mission for CalWorks.
Good.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
I'm yes on all of them, so.
I am too.
I am too.
There you go.
There you go.
What about you, Mr. Spellman?
Mr. Spellman, on the non-general fund positions.
Basically, Maria just said she's yes on all of them. I'm yes on all of them with one caveat.
Oh, we
I
don't
would
do...
ask that,
Go ahead.
I would ask that anybody who is requesting funding for vehicle purchases that would be subsequently subject to a new fleet management system, that they defer those, that we defer the purchase or the approval of purchase of any vehicle is the fleet management.
Okay, your comments are well taken, and I'm assuming we'll be discussing that. We'll be discussing that in April. What he's saying is he doesn't want to fill any vehicles unless people commit to doing a fleet management program, which could be a year or two down the road. So
No.
what? You're saying you didn't want to fill them
What I'm
unless
saying is, I expect that there will be a fleet management system in, not a couple years down the road, but maybe a couple years down the road. That we will see something implemented within 6 months tops. The way I feel about it.
I think that
we should
Utah's getting your brain there.
any money.
Thank you.
Defer any money spent on vehicles until such time that we have that nailed down for any vehicles that we fall underneath.
Okay. You all heard what he said. Do you support subtracting all the vehicles out of that? Is there a support for that? Do we have fleet management?
No.
No, I think that it'll integrate into it anyhow.
I agree.
The sheriff's vehicles are subsequent to that because I don't believe that they'll fall into the fleet management like all the other departments.
Okay.
For the sake of making sure that we get off on the right foot with fleet management, you probably ought to wait. I mean, who wants to spend money out of their budget to purchase new vehicles when they're going to be swept into a fleet, which is not necessarily, they're spending department money on something that's going to become fleet.
Okay. Understand. It's a 4-1 vote on the fleet, on the vehicles that are here. Lori, could you move on?
Yes, the final is just letting the board know that we will be returning on June 25th with the resolutions and other technical adjustments, miscellaneous acts that the board needs to take to actually adopt and implement the recommended budget.
So could you go back to the 450, and that's sort of a placeholder for the jail, I understand, because their budget, as Rebecca pointed out, their budget memo said $339,000. This says $450. I don't think, at the moment it's just sort of a dollar semantic, but we need to put in a placeholder in the recommended budget.
This amount is not included in the recommended budget, just to be clear.
Okay, so
we can add it to the final budget.
You can. I'm recommending we add it to the recommended budget, and we look at the bottom line and see where else we maybe should make a cut. So, is there support on that? We could change the number.
No, not until we go through the detailed workshop.
Well, we could fit in any number. We could take their budget memo and put in $339,000. I just think there needs to be a placeholder to remind us that we have funding for the jail.
Right, but then that gets back into the whole discussion about the software. That's we deferred that as well. That's even a larger cost.
I voted to defer the HR software.
Not the HR. I'm talking about the more expensive stuff.
Well, they haven't even come to us.
Well, yes, they have. They just have deferred it until after this discussion of the preliminary budget.
Until they negotiate.
It's been right. Regardless of how you want to wrap it up.
Chris, if you want to add the property tax system and put a dollar amount in there, you're welcome to recommend that.
No, I'm saying we should do with both of these. We should defer it until.
Okay, I gave my opinion. You gave yours.
But on the jail, aren't we committed to that at this point on the jail?
My understanding is that we are. You're looking to me, so I.
Okay.
My understanding is that we are committed to opening the jail. That in order to get our $1.2 million back, we need to open the jail with an understanding that we can accommodate 80 beds. And the sheriff's estimate, as late as this morning, was that in order to open that jail and accommodate 80 beds, they would need an additional $450,000.
For a year.
One clarification, for an entire year. So that will not be your cost this year. That is for an entire year. That would assume we had the staff hired and opened up at the day one of the fiscal year and closed at the end of the fiscal year. So that number is actually going to be reduced significantly depending upon when the hires are made and when the jail opens.
Thank you for that clarification. And with that clarification, since my understanding is we are not going to be opening the jail until September, October, or later, I would again encourage us to think about this again with final budget.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Clear?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Mr. Spellman?
I'm voting yes to give them the money that they need to open the jail correctly from the commitments that we've made.
Okay, do you think we should have a placeholder in the recommended budget for the jail?
I think that we should give them the funding they're requesting to open at 80 beds. And if there is a savings that's realized, of the actual amount for the fiscal year comes in less than what they've been appropriated, then so be it. But we need to give them the money that they need necessary to be compliant with the state to open at 80 beds so that we don't jeopardize the $1.2 million the state is withholding.
Okay, so if nothing else, that's going to be it's a 2-3 vote to have a placeholder in recommended budget, and we'll defer that to final budget. Okay.
She needs clarification.
Spellman and I voted to have a placeholder, and
So did I.
Yeah, let's.
I thought you said you all said no.
No.
To final budget.
Well,
No, I agree with the placeholder.
placeholder's fine.
I think we're committed to it.
I mean, that's why you went after the property tax system.
So for clarification, a placeholder means we would have to put dollars into the recommended budget, which means, again, we would have to identify a source, so that would be coming from...
Identify cuts. We just identify a source, and we can say it comes out of the teeter fund for that until the final budget.
For clarification, if you're putting this in, is it just going to be a single line item as a placeholder, or are you actually authorizing the positions that you're requesting?
Yeah, no, that's why I wanted to bring it up to as a workshop.
Okay, I'll just tell you, I will back off on the 450 or some permutation of 450, but I do support the recruitment and the positions for the jail that have been recommended in the recommended budget. Do two recommendeds make a not recommended? So whatever the sheriff's office had submitted for positions to get ready to open the facility, I support that we have those funds in the recommended budget.
And where are the funds coming from? As you like to ask.
I don't know. Take away 2 deputies. Take away 4 deputies. To me, the jail is for me. You're asking me for 65 or 80 right?
Yeah, because that's the part that...
Hell, I'll be conservative and say 65 and worry about 15 beds at final budget, because we're going to have to do that at some point in the 13, 14.
I just feel like we need to wait on this
So you don't
and
want
defer. We need to have a longer discussion. I think we've all reached agreement here that there's need for jail funding. We just don't know how much. And so to say we're going to cut the 2 deputy sheriffs to fund the correctional officers, I don't think we're at that stage right now. We might as well reopen everything.
He has a whole bunch of interviews going today or this week, and
right,
he's had trouble, so he can't do that.
What I'm saying is that I think we're in agreement that there's funding necessary for this. We're not in agreement. We don't know where that funding is going to come from, correct? No? Marie?
Well, I know where, but...
No, you don't? You don't
Well, yeah, because I didn't vote for some of the things you all voted for. And so I'm just telling you that we have a facility that's going to be open. We have the jail commander saying he's going to be interviewing 2 positions.
I agree.
And if we don't approve that now, then he cannot start
filling or interviewing to fill or offering positions until we do final budget, which will be in September.
These are in addition to.
Yeah.
These are positions that are
In addition to, correct.
It's recommended.
Correct. I understand that.
So can you, let's hear from Ed.
The positions I spoke about earlier were the ones that were approved for me last year. Those are what I'm currently doing my recruiting for now. Logistically, the more people I get hired, the faster, the more I get the training done and we move in and my operational plan's done.
So your three techs
Still recruit.
Yeah.
We still recruit.
He doesn't start paying until he actually makes an offer of employment and somebody starts. So we can have an open to fill position where he can begin that process.
And maybe I can pick him up as extra hire.
I mean, he still needs to catch up with what he has
Oh,
now.
you've got money to pick him up as extra hire?
We can move forward and get ready without the dollar amount.
Okay.
I think
So now-
I'd like to see a placeholder.
So
But if
can we-
there's not support for that, that's fine.
Well,
May I ask for a point of clarification?
please.
Okay. So under our budget tab, we have the jail. Our current proposal for 2013-14 is $2.3 million. Am I looking at that
That's
correctly?
probably the general fund contribution if you're looking at the very bottom of that tab, yes?
Yes. Okay. And these are positions that are listed in this budget that have already been approved at some point.
There are positions that are included in the recommended budget that are vacant and unfilled that the sheriff is currently recruiting and interviewing for.
Okay.
These are over and above that.
Okay, hold on. Well, I'm going to take baby steps. Okay? So in the budget memo for the jail, it's requesting a net increase of $338,000. Is that reflective
Yeah, that's the,
in this 2.3?
No.
No.
That was his enhanced budget request at that moment.
Okay, so we're looking at 2.3 in the budget plus 338,000 that's listed in the budget memo plus.
No, this 450 is their newest, latest estimate of what they would need. It would replace that 350 that's in the
Okay.
budget memo, as I understand it.
Brandon Cody, Budget Analyst, Sheriff's Office.
Okay, slow down. Thank you.
I have a problem with speed, right, Cliff?
Too fast.
Too fast. Excellent.
Thank you.
Brandon Cody, Budget Analyst, Sheriff's Office. The budget memo that you received as part of our strategic budget was looking to get the jail financed for a 65-bed facility. The number that you saw today was for twofold: to have the bed financed at 65 facility, and what it would cost us at a full-year cost to bring it up to 80 beds. We are only looking for one of those funding levels. As actually our recommendation for the $460,000 number you saw, because we did our best over the last couple of days to trim that number down as much as feasibly possible. It's status quo plus the request that we just showed today.
To get the return of the $1.2 million.
I think Captain Ballard would be the best person to talk to you on this subject matter, but it's my understanding it's at least 80 beds, but he is the subject matter expert.
And just before you leave, just so I'm clear, this 450 is again a full year. We would be looking at less that amount for the first year because it depends on when we open it. But going forward, it would be that amount plus the added cost for pay increases.
CO is exactly correct. There's one exception to that. You see for service and supplies from 65 to 80, we did a half-year cost, trying to pick a nice round number. So if you're curious what it would cost full year, you would simply double that. That is a high-end conservative cost for that first year, and it's most likely, per what CO said, that will be lower.
Clear as mud?
When we have the staffing study, you'll understand.
And here's the breakdown in page 5 minutes.
But in the meantime, we have to make a decision.
Yes, and in the meantime, during the budget presentations, we had the status quo, and then we had the strategic thing, and then I was asked, what does that mean? And we were talking about being without drawing it out, that we were under for 65, and this was going to get us started to catch up there. I was asked to go back that night, and what would it absolutely take, the ideal with relief factor and all those things, and then the next day I brought that in, and that's what that big, large number was. In between time, we realized that that was a huge number to get to, especially where we're at. So we sat down and brought it down to what I would absolutely, positively need to move in there to get that operated at 80. And when I show you when we do the staffing study, I'll be able to show you what that means. This number here, with those positions that we're asking for, puts me on the confidence level of being able to get in there with 80 inmates and operate it at the very limited amount of staffing that I would need to do our job.
So I'll make a recommendation, is that we use that number as a placeholder. We identify teeter as the placeholder fund, and that way we can move on to the next meeting.
I'll be even more conservative. Since we know that's for a year, I recommend what they did in their recommended budget, which was $339,000. At least that reminds us that we have to. What are you going to say?
What I'm going to say is that there's a difference in a position between this and what they were asking for and recommended. This includes 3 correctional techs and 2 correctional officers. The 350 something that was in the strategic plan only had in the 3 correctional techs and 1 correctional officer.
And again, that's the difference between what they need for 65 beds and 80 beds.
Okay.
So if you're going to do the 450, we're talking about 5 positions. If you're talking about the 4 positions.
Well, we're doing a placeholder right now until after the workshop. So let's go with the smaller amount and identify it as teeter funding for now, and then we can have a larger discussion once we get more information.
Okay, then as a point of clarification, it is a single line item, placeholder only, doesn't speak to any specific positions. To be added to the position control list. I'm trying to help because
I understand what you're saying. I don't think I agree with that.
Well, that's what I'm trying to find out.
Sorry.
So just as a point of clarification, we have to adopt a budget. A budget is required to have line items and funding. There is no such thing as a placeholder. We either have to put money in the budget and put positions in the budget or not.
This is the preliminary budget, and we'll have time to make corrections to the final budget, correct?
Correct. But the recommended also has to be adopted as a balanced budget by June 30th.
Sure. And that's why I'm making the recommended that we go with the lower number, 330-something thousand, for a placeholder. Not a placeholder.
We put the positions and the dollars in.
Put the positions, whatever legally needs to be done. The funding source for now is teeter, and then we'll figure it out at the next meeting. Once we have more information in review of the study session.
Then are you putting in the 4 positions or the 5 positions? Are you putting in?
Let's put in 5 positions.
Well, that's going to be magical.
Are you anticipating a delayed start date to get down to that low number?
I'm saying that this is what is the preliminary, to meet the requirements for the preliminary budget to be final. This is what I'm suggesting.
So I understand the recommendation, and if we have 3 board members to support it, I think the number will actually be less than that because, again, that 360 number was also for a full year's operation. I would suggest that we can work with the Sheriff's Department. We can put this in, this amount and these positions, and come back, and my hope is that we will get down to a number that is less than this for the final budget.
Sounds good.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Mr. Spellman?
I'm voting yes to give them whatever money that's required to legally comply with the state mandate so that we don't jeopardize the $1.2 million and we can open the jail.
Okay, I'm a yes.
I hope so. You're the one that brought it up. Wow. 5-0. Let's adjourn quick.
Okay, I'm sorry, Shirley, did you, or Lori?
I have nothing else to offer. Thank you very much.
When you go down to the bottom line, are we balanced? Even though it's a phony balance?
And so you're saying take 450 or whatever it turns out to be from Peter, but on the...
Yeah, it's just a paper coverage. Okay.
And you have a contingency of 853,953, which is just the difference between the 4 deputy positions and the 350,000 from the PLF.
Okay.
So, and then the 3,952.
Okay.
I heard that it was the lower number that we're putting in 5 positions and the 360 number that they asked for in the...
Right. It was just, I didn't have that number, so I left it with where it was.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else, CAO?
Just thank you all very much for your patience. I know this has been challenging.
I may see if the board has any closing comments. Mr. Spellman?
I just want to say I'm very proud of the board and of our staff and our CAO for being able to make it through these very tough times and tough decisions with the amount of frankness and candor that we've offered up, and at the same time being respectful of people's professional opinions and the delicate matters that we've been discussing. It's been much better than years past in my career, so I appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Spellman. Mr. Edson?
Yeah, I also want to thank staff for the hard work that they've been doing over the months. And thank you, Lori, for coming in and leading that. I think a level of confidence is going up in our community because you're here. So I really appreciate that. Thanks to the board for, I know it's been on our minds for all last week, for sure. And it was kind of a tough week because somebody spread a cold around in the room.
Yeah.
And, we all went in there healthy, and I think 3 or 4 of us came out sniffling and having a rough time. But I guess that's a price you got to pay for. I also feel that the board has listened to their constituents, and public safety is number one right now. I happen to agree with that myself. In order for us to be able to attract any type of business or any type of progress in the county, we need the county to be safe. And I want to thank the Sheriff's Department for coming with the absolute real figures and what they're doing. I feel like they're more relaxed than what I seen last year, for sure. And thank you for coming with the real figures and what we really need to do instead of the Taj Mahal type thing. Appreciate that. It's kind of tough around here in Calaveras County right now, and we all have to suffer for it. I know the businesses have been suffering for the past 4 years, for sure. I'm really sure of that. And so hopefully we'll be able to start improving that end of the deal so that we can earn money to pay for our services and run our county like it should operate. But one thing's for sure, it cannot go on the way it's going right now. So thank you very much.
Mr. Ray?
Thank you to everyone, all the staff throughout the county. And really, these are tough decisions, and, I think, like I said, everything needs to be said earlier.
Supervisor Ponte?
Yeah, just reiterate what's been said and hoping for a cash carryover. Is that what it's called? Of about $4 million. So we will wait to see what final budget brings us. So, thank you.
I have to say I am disappointed because we're just kicking the issues down the road till final budget. I would have much rather we waited till final budget to make some of these decisions. We're $1 million, millions, S plural, in the hole. The gap is widening, and this board is going to have to make some very difficult decisions. And I think it's been premature what we have approved. When we come to final budget next week, I got to do a lot of cogitating on whether I'm going to support the recommended budget or not. In concept, I support everything this board has talked about today, but when I just look at the dollars and take away the emotion, and I look out at departments who've been suffering for years and who've had to suck it up, and they've done so in a very honorable way. I'm going to have to think about this come next Tuesday, since we have to have a final budget per state law, the Constitution. So the recommended budget, yeah, I know, but I think the decisions we've made today, we have committed to a spending plan. When we approve it on Tuesday, we are saying, departments, you can go ahead and start spending per the recommended budget. And I think that's what we've done is a little irresponsible on our part until waiting to see what happens with assessed value and the cash carry, as Supervisor Connick talked about next year. But that's my pontificating, having been through a few very nasty years, the last few years. I don't want to see layoffs. I don't want to see furloughs. And this budget, I'm assuming will be approved Tuesday, puts us in that direction. And that's very painful. But anyway, that's my editorial comment. And we will see you all on Tuesday.
I just want to say I don't think we've been irresponsible. I think we're being responsible for our community and the safety of our citizens.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because right now, irresponsibility is not protecting our citizens and our business owners and our homeowners and the people that live in our communities. That would be irresponsible. So what we've done.
Okay, this meeting is adjourned till Tuesday.